how we were thinking about innovation and being able to bring access to patients worldwide. As we all get much more comfortable with that space, our clients are saying that is going to be that catalyst of being able to come into this new year, and we've seen it at JP Morgan this week, come into this new year, get excited about the innovation that's happening, be able to pay and realistically do that diligence and tick and tie every single piece of the financial, the commercial, the tax, and other ramifications of each of these deals, and then get them going and moving.
Yeah, expectations, though, definitely high. So we'll see how that works out. Kristen, thanks a lot. It was really great to get your perspective. I love that you were fresh off of the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. We were there as well. Right. M&A definitely a focus there. Kristen Pothier joining us from KPMG. She's the U.S. sector lead for life sciences. All right, coming up, I'm basically going to take a break, and Nora's going to talk about commercial real estate, because apparently she has 14 different beats. But one of them, her true love, has been real estate for quite a long time. Jeff Langbaum is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. REIT Analyst. Is this going to be the year, Nora?
We'll see. I'm excited to hear what he has to say.
Okay, well, we will get to that in just a moment. Right after this, you're taking a look at a market that just wants to buy. That's basically my takeaway of the price action today. The NASDAQ is up by about 1.5%. Intel really helping that move along as well. And the S&P is up by a full 1 percentage point. Happy Friday. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Intelligence Radio, and happy Friday to all of our listeners. We're seeing a broad-based rally in the U.S. equity market right now. We're seeing the S&P 500 up more than 1%, the NASDAQ up about 1.5%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.9%. All sectors of the S&P 500 are in the green right now, and we're led higher by information technology stocks. But next up, we have a super smart guy and one of my favorite people to talk to who knows all the things about commercial real estate in the U.S. REIT market. We're here with Jeffrey Langbaum, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. REIT Analyst, and he's here to talk about commercial real estate ahead of earnings season. So he did have this report. It's 70% of respondents to BI's November survey for New York City say that they have a hybrid work model, while only 21% say that they're fully remote. For many who thought that remote work would be forever, of course, this 21% is a fairly low number. Jeff, tell us what's going on here.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Nora. So I think it's important to remember. So hybrid doesn't necessarily mean back in the office 5 days, right? I mean, by definition, it doesn't. So remote work is still here to stay. It's just not fully remote. And so the key, what that means for the real estate space, for the office space specifically, is that there is still leasing going on. And in fact, you know, the second half of 2024, we saw a significant amount of office leasing, very clearly positioned in the better quality assets. Adjacent to transportation is key. That was another result from our survey, which was the biggest obstacle for getting people back in the office was commuting. So offices near train stations are going to have an advantage. And we've seen a big boost in leasing as a result of the fact that people are actually coming to the offices.
We did hear, though, from JP Morgan that it was, guys, get back 5 days a week. And I feel like once you hear the first one, quickly Wall Street banks are going to hustle to do the same. How long does something like that then have an effect on, say, the office REIT market?
Well, so we've also heard that there's been some pushback to that. So we'll see how that actually plays out over time and what that means for a number of people in the office, every day. But that actually leads to another takeaway from our survey, which was an increase in the number of companies that were actually adding to their footprint of space, which was a little counterintuitive because you'd think with a lack of people or with people doing some days at home, you need less space. But there's actually companies increasing their footprint. And again, it might actually end up consolidating into those better quality assets and separating out the top tier assets from the bottom. Lower quality office property is going to have to figure out what they're going to become in the future.
When we think about the U.S. office REIT landscape, and particularly here in New York City, are there any particular areas that you're keeping an eye on that have higher occupancy, or maybe some of those higher end names that you've been discussing?
Yeah, well, so the Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue corridor is, occupancy rates are significantly elevated. There's a lack of availability of space. It's leading to a price war in some cases. One of the contributors to that is because nothing new has been built, right? I mean, JP Morgan's got their new building coming out of the ground, but that's already spoken for. If you looked at just that piece of the city as its own market, you wouldn't know that there was a challenging office environment. I also mentioned adjacent to train stations, right? So you've got around Grand Central, SL Green's One Vanderbilt building that they put up a couple of years ago, fully leased, high-end tenants, top of the chart kind of stuff. Vornado Realty, another New York-based REIT, which is heavily focused around Penn Station, they've got some interesting stuff going on over there where they're redeveloping some buildings adjacent to the train station, buildings that historically leased at like $60 a foot, and they're getting $90 to $100 a foot on the release space. So there's clearly an advantage to new stuff and adjacent to train stations.
Huh. That's really interesting. And I wonder if that gets even more intense now that we have the congestion charge here as well. I mean, maybe it's not because you're traveling from Connecticut anyway. You wouldn't have been driving, but still. Right. In your world of REITs, which ones are you looking at, like to outperform or that you have question marks on? Which ones are you focusing on?
Well, so one space where the outperformance has been significant, and it's kind of a little bit off the beaten path of traditional pure commercial real estate, but senior housing has been in the midst of a significant rebound. This is coming out of the pandemic, so now obviously that's several years back, but got hit really hard, as you would imagine, given the nature of that asset class. Occupancies have been in a very prolonged bounce back, and they are growing their operating income and funds from operations much more rapidly than most other property sectors. So that's one that we're still looking at heading into 2025. And another is data centers. The push from AI is you can find any aspect of the equity markets that is trying to get its handle on that AI surge, and data centers is where it's playing out in commercial real estate.
Oh, yeah, that definitely will be one to watch. All right, Jeff, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Jeff Langbaum, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. REIT Analyst. I feel like I'm in between two experts at the Mo, so that was kind of fun to observe and listen. Nora, what are you working on in the REITs market right now?
I mean, always keeping an eye on home builders. As you mentioned, REITs. Of course, office is still topical, as Jeff was just talking about. That's something that I'm keeping an eye on, especially if we start to see more of an uptick.
Yep.
People are going back into the office. Maybe not what everyone predicted, but
we'll see.
That's apparently the case.
All right, well, for our listeners in the U.S., here's a reminder. Go ahead and listen to us via satellite radio on SiriusXM, channel 121, across the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on SiriusXM, channel 121 is presented by Oracle. Stay tuned for the latest market news and industry research. The next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been in U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday. I'm Alex Steele alongside Nora Melinda. Paul Sweeney is off today. One more hour of Bloomberg Intelligence to go, and we have a good one lined up for you. Phil Orlando, Chief Equity Market Strategist over at Federated Hermes, will be joining us on his take on the market. We got a monster equity rally underway. Earnings seriously kick off next week. J&J, Netflix, will break down what to expect from that end. Plus, we have the ruling from the Supreme Court upholding the ban on TikTok starting on Sunday. Mandeep Singh of Bloomberg Intelligence will be joining us on that. Plus, it's Friday, so it's Munis. Max Adler is a Bloomberg Municipal Bond Reporter, will be joining us to discuss the latest news in the muni market. We're going to wrap that into the LA fires as well and what all of that means. But for now, let's kick it off. Here's Charlie Pellet with your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you very much, Alex and Nora. Here's what's going on. We have got stocks not just ripping higher, but best level of the morning right now with the S&P 500 index back above 6,000, 6,002 right now, on track for a winning week. This is the first full trading week of the year. We have got the S&P on the week up by roughly 3%. Right to the numbers with the S&P at 6,002, up 65, up 1.1%. The Dow up 404 now, up 0.9%. NASDAQ up 302, up by just about 1.6%. And the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, again, higher by 0.7%. 10-year at 4.60% with the 2-year, 4.26%. Spot gold is up little change right now, 30 cents the ounce, 27.14. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1%, 77.91 for a barrel of WTI. The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld a law that threatens to shut down the wildly popular TikTok social media platform in the U.S. as soon as Sunday, ruling that free speech rights must yield to concerns that Chinese control of the app creates a national security risk. Bloomberg's Ben Bain says incoming President Donald Trump wants to keep TikTok alive.
He wants to be able to cut a deal. He essentially wants to be the person who's going to be able to figure out any kind of potential sale here, which this law would require.
And right now we've got shares of social media companies Meta Platforms up by 0.1%. Snap Inc. trading lower by 3.6%. Israel's security cabinet has approved a ceasefire and hostage prisoner exchange deal with Hamas, paving the way for a weeks-long pause in fighting in Gaza. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. Alex Steele here alongside Norma Linda, and it's Friday, and it's what, the third week of the year?
Is it? I mean, I'm losing count at this point.
I'm definitely losing track at the same time as well. Who's not losing track, well, we hope, is Vincent Signorella, Bloomberg macro strategist, who finally, after 4 years, has fixed his audio issue in his basement. Vince, I applaud you for this victory.
Wow, it took long enough, didn't it?
And it took you a little bit. Hey, what do you make of the price action today? It honestly feels like an excuse to buy at the moment. How are you interpreting it right now?
Yeah, I mean, we see, it's interesting. We saw some numbers that generally don't move the dial at around 9:15, industrial production and manufacturing production. And Treasury sold off on that. Yields really, really popped, took the dollar higher. But equities just glanced over it and just gave it a shrug and continued to go higher. It's going to be interesting to see how we get into the close. I look at that Treasury move. Number one, yeah, they reacted to what is inflationary data, but it's more of a minor data set. Almost more like they were a little bit of profit taking because there was a lot of buying going into this week and into today. Wonder if the equity markets will do the same later on, maybe after 3 going into the close. We're looking at the Dow pretty close to session. S&P cash pretty close to session highs at 6,000. Pretty difficult psychological level. Interesting to see if they can push it, but not sure what's driving it other than the euphoria over the potential presidential election and Trump basically reversing a lot of Biden's policies, which maybe some say stifle growth.
Hey, Vincent, the data keeps coming. We've gotten so much data this week, from PPI to CPI, housing starts, retail sales. What's been your read as you're kind of looking at these data points and what it could mean in terms of the Fed's rate cut trajectory this year?
The equity market's not seeing it, but, we saw some comments from the Cleveland Fed President Hammack this morning speaking to the Wall Street Journal, completely opposite of what Waller said yesterday, and I'm kind of more in Hammack's camp. We don't know what trade's going to do. We don't know what Trump's policy is going to do. And to say what Waller said yesterday, that these aren't going to affect inflation, frankly, I think is naive. Sorry to say that, but to ignore that is just irresponsible. There's so much going forward that projects the potential for higher rates. That is something that, without really strong earnings, should inevitably weigh on equities. I think it's definitely going to weigh on the bond market. Would not be a big fan of owning bonds here. I think the call for 5, even 6% for the 10-year is a realistic possibility for this year.
Right, and we've heard 6 now, like T. Rowe Price and Nomura saying that's now a real possibility as well, which was what made the Waller conversation with CNBC yesterday such a head scratcher, right? Like it eked it out just before the blackout time, still talking about the potential for 3 to 4 cuts, which seemed quite a surprise. What do you think then happens to the bond market? Like 6%? Would that be something in your Vince brain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 5% for sure before even the end of the first quarter, to be honest. And then we'll see how the inflation projection goes from here. I mean, inflation's not going down. One of the numbers we saw this week, which no one really puts a lot of weight to, and they should, is the import price index, and it leads CPI, and then that leads yields. And we saw import prices jump again in December, where they were expected to decline. And, we're an import country. We don't make a whole lot of stuff here. So if the import price index is going up and food prices are going up and energy prices are going up, inflation is going to go up, and it's going to take yields with it. I mean, it's just a foregone conclusion. I don't see where people are seeing inflation not going higher. I don't see where Waller's coming from. His comments yesterday actually contradict his own modeling forecasts. So I totally don't know where he was coming with that yesterday. And every trader I talked to, same thing. Head scratch, like, is he kidding? So I would not put a lot of weight into what he said yesterday, although the Treasury market jumped all over it. I'm thinking maybe that's more positioning, and we'll see going forward. It just doesn't look positive for bonds for me.
Hey, Vincent, you mentioned that inflation is not necessarily coming down. It's still well above that 2% target that we've been watching. Mm-hmm. Where is your focus in terms of data? I mean, at one point we were looking at employment numbers, and then it felt like the read was inflation data in terms of what the Fed could be doing next. Where do you feel like we are in that discussion?
So again, like I said, I keep a close eye on the import prices. Another thing when you look at the labor market is the JOLTS data. Everyone's saying how strong that market is, but the problem with the JOLTS data is it basically gets fed from internet job type stuff, and there's a year lag in that. And a lot of companies are continuing to post jobs that really don't exist. It's a psychological thing apparently within a corporation that if you post a lot of jobs, it gives the employees a good feeling that the company's doing well and such, and that there are opportunities to move within. And the JOLTS data is really a little bit skewed in terms where I should say it's a little bit suspect in that it really doesn't reflect where the real jobs market is. So it's something to keep an eye on, I think.
Vince, the kids say sus now. And by kids, I mean my 10-year-old. I'm just updating you on the cool lingo. Vincent Signorella, great to see you, Bloomberg macro strategist. Thank you very, very much. Let's get more take here on the market. Phil Orlando is Chief Equity Market Strategist and Head of Client Portfolio Management at Federated Hermes. Hey, Phil, what do you make of the rally today?
A little surprising. The equity market, S&P 500 was down 5% or so from early December up until, a couple of days ago. We've been on this nice little uptick here. We got some, marginally better CPI data on Wednesday. Retail sales were pretty good yesterday. Data today, typically not market moving. And you've got a long weekend, and you've got the inauguration coming up on Monday. So, frankly, I'm a little surprised that the rally here is robust as it is, given the uncertainty of, a new sheriff in town next week, and what might the changes in fiscal policy look like.
Phil, how are you and your team thinking about tech stocks? I mean, of course, they took us really most of the way last year when we think about just the broader rally. How are you all thinking about them? Are they overvalued? Are they too expensive?
In a word, yes. When you got up to the levels you had, the Mag 7 names over the space of about 2 years, 23 and 24, dramatically outperformed the forgotten 493 by about 100 percentage points. So our view for the last couple of quarters has been that there would be a reversion of the mean, that investors would sort of allow the Mag 7 names to sort of drift sideways, and significant catch up with the value stocks and the small caps and the internationals. That trend has been playing out. We think it's got legs, but specifically as it relates to the tech names, what we saw is the end of 23 earnings growth year over year for those Mag 7 names was up around 60%, 60%. And we're now seeing a more rational pace of growth. We went from 60 to 50, 50 to 30, and we now, over the course of the next year, we think that earnings growth is going to be a more reasonable 20%, give or take. Yet the forgotten 493, which had negative earnings a year ago, they're in the process of sort of growing into a more normal, 10 or 11%. So that's sort of the rational levels that we think the market needs to look at. And on that basis, we felt that this reversion to the mean trade, where the underperformers play catch up and the stocks that have done really well sort of go sideways for a while, we think that trend continues.
Should I be worried about the dollar here when you talk about earnings in terms of some of the commentary?
The strength of the dollar?
Yeah.
Well, we think the dollar continues to be strong, based upon the disparity in economic growth in the U.S. versus, our major trading partners, and relative central bank policy, and certainly the new administration's policies coming in. So we think the dollar stays strong. If the question is, does that potentially represent a hurdle for U.S.-based multinational companies that do a disproportionate amount of their business overseas? The answer is yes, as they, translate their revenues and earnings back? Does the currency affect, is there a little bit of a hickey there that we've got to compensate for? The answer is yes. But I'd rather be in a position where, the U.S. economy is strong, the central bank's operating from a position of strength, and multinational companies based here are forced to sort of manage to that environment rather than the other side of the coin.
And keeping on that train of thought, how are you thinking about tariffs, the idea of tariffs? How does that affect equities? Are there any sectors that are more sensitive in particular?
Well, the tariff question is probably one of the most uncertain questions with the advent of the new Trump administration. He's made a big push about, we're going to have, a lot of tariffs. In our view, this is sort of like hanging the dead pigeon from the roof of your house in order to discourage the other pigeons from landing on the roof of your house. I think we're going to see a couple of countries or a couple of companies made examples of, with the idea then of being able to use the threat of the imposition of tariffs as a means of negotiating or extracting better trade terms, ultimately resulting in better economic growth and lower inflation for the United States. But there's an uncertainty as to exactly how does that policy look? How does it play out? How is it implemented? Frankly, we have no idea.
Right.
And we're going to be living through that uncertainty over the course of coming weeks and months. And the fact that the market's up 65 points today, with that uncertainty coming up on Monday, is a little confusing to me.
Yeah, and that's why I don't envy your job right now, because on the one hand, you can't model these things. Like, you're going to have companies coming in and saying that they're looking at tariffs, or this is how they're preparing for it, or this is what they think about it, but nothing is going to be finalized. So it's going to be really tricky, and it sort of has long-term effects, and it is also a trading opportunity. So how do you just get through all that noise and kind of stick to your fundamentals?
Well, you just answered the question. You've got to sort of stick to fundamentals and recognize that if there's a sea change in what our underlying assumptions are, then we've got to make a policy pivot. So our base case is that we don't expect President Trump to conduct himself like Oprah with tariffs. You get 100% tariff, you get 100%, you get 100%. We think it's going to be much more selective and used as a policy tool to try to extract better trade terms that ultimately boosts economic growth in the United States. But if it turns out that we're wrong and the tariff bludgeon is used much more broadly and it does deleteriously impact inflation and economic growth, then we're going to have to sharpen our pencil and go back to the drawing board.
As we're into 2025 now, are you all seeing any opportunities in small caps?
Oh, absolutely. Small caps, both growth and value, are one of the areas that we've liked probably since the middle of last year. That trade, hasn't worked as well as we'd like, but we do expect that over the course of the next, 12 to 18 months, interest rates are going to continue to come down. There will be a significant increase, we think, in merger and acquisition activity, M&A activity. Regs will come down. All of that should benefit small cap stocks, particularly in healthcare. If interest rates are lower, the regs come down. Biotechnology stocks, for example, the pipelines look very, very attractive. We'd love to see the big pharma companies start to do some M&A with the smaller biotechnology companies, and we think that will sort of put a spotlight on the significant undervaluation, but the strong underlying fundamentals of that sector, and we think that small caps will work in that environment.
Well, what I can tell you is that they have definitely bounced many times off that 200-day moving average. So, that feels like a very firm resistance. It's just a matter of when it really starts to outperform many, obviously looking at mid caps as well. Hey, Phil, really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Phil Orlando, Chief Equity Market Strategist and Head of Client Portfolio Management over at Federated Hermes. And, of course, the M&A cycle, Nora, when that winds up really kicking up,
right,
where it does, are the small caps actually delevered enough to make all of this make sense?
So many questions.
So many questions. We still have 45 minutes of Bloomberg Intelligence to answer all of them. Coming up, we're going to take a look at munis. Max Adler is Bloomberg Municipal Bond Reporter. We're going to break down the latest from the muni markets, including how the LA fires are rattling that market that has rarely been phased by natural disasters. Plus, Annie Massa will be joining us. She's Bloomberg Wealth reporter on Trump's canceled empire and it making a comeback in a big political rise. This is Bloomberg Intelligence. Happy Friday.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A Friday stock market rally. This Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by Oracle. Attention, growing businesses. Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Developing story with the Federal Trade Commission suing PepsiCo under a rarely invoked 1930s law called the Robinson-Patman Act that bars price discrimination against retailers. PepsiCo up 1.1%, rival Coca-Cola up by 0.5%. Big stock market rally underway with the S&P up 69 now, up by 1.1%. The Dow surging 442, also up 1%. Nasdaq up 312, a gain of 1.6%. 10-year 4.61%, the 2-year 4.26%. 1%. Gold little changed, up $2 the ounce, 27.16. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.9%, 78 even a barrel. Bottom line here, stocks ripping higher. Phil Orlando is chief equity market strategist at Federated Hermes, and moments ago on Bloomberg Intelligence, he told us, yes, he's a little surprised by today's advance.
And you've got a long weekend, and you've got the inauguration coming up on Monday. So, frankly, I'm a little surprised that the rally here is robust as it is, given the uncertainty of, a new sheriff in town next week, and what might the changes in fiscal policy look like.
Phil Orlando of Federated Hermes, and yes, Monday we will be here covering Donald Trump's inauguration. Recapping S&P up 68, up 1.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus.
Focus on Munis is brought to you by BAM Mutual Insures municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Visit bambonds.com.
Bam.
Bam.
I wanted to say that.
I know, but they changed the promo, so it's not as bammy. It's not bam. It's a little bit more reserved. Okay. One thing that we know in the bond market is that typically when there's a natural disaster, the muni market rarely actually moves on that. One exception, though, now may be the LA wildfires. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is the biggest American municipal utility, has now seen its bonds drop and credit rating downgraded as those blazes continue to burn. So joining us now for more to break all this down for us is Max Adler, a Bloomberg Municipal Bond reporter. Hey, Max, can you just walk us through typically why munis aren't affected by natural disasters and then set us up for what's happening in LA?
Thank you guys both for having me. Typically munis do not trade on headline risk. They do not move after big disasters. After Hurricane Sandy hit New York, most New York credits that were tied to the disaster did not see any movement. But these wildfires in LA have really exposed the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's fire preparedness, and they might be opening themselves up to a lot of lawsuits and a lot of potential liabilities. And even if they aren't on the hook for a lot of liabilities from the damage, they still have at least $1 billion in infrastructure needs that they have to make improvements on immediately to prevent some of these fires from starting in the future. Some of those things include hiding the power lines and burying them underneath the ground. And it looks like LADWP, which used to trade pretty much with pristine AAA credits, it looks like it's going to take some hits, and we've seen spreads on those credits widening markedly over the last week.
Hey, Max, so what exactly was going on here? Was the LA Department of Water and Power just unprepared? You mentioned that they could have just been a bit vulnerable.
So they are denying that. They said that the reason that some of their fire hydrants were losing pressure was just because of the unprecedented nature of these wildfires and how much water they were needing to fight these. But they are currently facing a lawsuit from some homeowners who are faulting it for not supplying enough water to fight the flames. Right now, there has not been a connection established to connect LADWP to the ignition of the fires. But definitely some problems with not having some of those reservoirs filled up and the hydrants losing power, especially in last week when they first started fighting.
Right. So, Max, talk us through sort of how much debt they have. I mentioned it was the rating was downgraded, but sort of how this winds up playing out. If they do have to wind up rebuilding and infrastructure and the whole deal, who pays for that?
Yeah, so they currently have $18 billion in debt outstanding. And it's the largest municipal utility in the country. And it feels like ratepayers from people that I'm talking to are going to end up being on the hook for this. And LADWP is not the most popular institution in the city. They faced a lawsuit in 2022 over some of their rates practices, and they'll likely be feeling some heat from the public in Los Angeles again if they do have to pass on the cost of some of their infrastructure improvement needs and potential liabilities onto customers.
Well, Max, you're also based in LA, and of course, this has been a really disastrous time for the area. How have things been? What has been your experience?
It's definitely an eerie time in Los Angeles. I live in West Hollywood. I was evacuated on Wednesday night. I moved to LA from New York last year, so I am not used to wildfires, and it was a pretty frightening experience trying to fight the gridlock and get out of the evacuation zone. But since then, my neighborhood has luckily been spared, but there's definitely just an eeriness that has taken over the entire city. There's definitely less foot traffic and less traffic in general right now. I love to go hiking at Runyon Canyon on the weekends, and that park has been closed because of a wildfire that broke out last week. So life has not returned to normal. Obviously, the fires are still ongoing, and pretty much every single person there has a connection to someone that has lost everything in one of these fires.
Yeah, I mean, even here in New York, like we all are like 1 degree separated from that exact same story. Max, I'm really glad that you're safe and et cetera. Before we let you go, the city of Los Angeles in particular, what are the chances that their debt gets downgraded and then also sort of impedes this whole recovery process?
Yeah, so if they do get downgraded, you know, that'll make it harder for them to tap the debt markets. It'll just make it more expensive for them. And S&P put them on credit watch this week, saying they have a 50% chance of being downgraded. They cited weakness in LADWP and the potential that LA taxpayers might have to take on some of that burden in their downgrade. So we could possibly be seeing that. We haven't seen any action from the other ratings agencies yet. So we don't quite know just how much their credit profile will be weakened. But it's not looking good.
Yeah, definitely one to watch. Max, thanks a lot. Stay safe, stay healthy. Max Adler, Bloomberg Municipal Bond Reporter, joining us from LA. Another interesting story to follow as President Trump takes the helm of D.C. yet again on Monday is his Trump Organization empire. It feels like the last 4 years has been verboten to speak about it or think about it, and now it's back in the spotlight in a good way. So we wanted to get more on this with Annie Massa. She's Bloomberg Wealth reporter, and she co-wrote a great piece called Trump's Canceled Empire Makes Comeback, Rivaling Political Rise. So are we allowed to talk about the Trump Organization now? People like it? Like it's cool now?
People are always allowed to talk about the Trump Organization and try to get a clearer picture of what its financials look like, which is what we tried to do in this piece. The idea was to look at how the Trump Organization has changed since Trump first took office in 2017 to today on the eve of his inauguration.
So in the story, you all point out the fact that ethics kind of wonder whether or not that the company's business dealings could lead to influence peddling and conflicts of interest. Talk to me a bit more about how the Trump Organization could potentially be a conflict of interest.
Sure, of course. Well, for Trump's entire first presidency, there were many conflicts of interest that were covered to the hilt. And as he returns to office, critics and watchdog groups have said that these conflicts have only expanded. So the majority, Trump is more than twice as rich now entering office again as he was last time around. And though it's true that most of that fortune of more than $7 billion comes from his social media platform, the Trump Organization, of course, is still a huge part of it. And there's this, I guess you could call it a virtuous cycle happening where the Trump Organization helped his myth-making, helped bring him to the place that he's in politics. And now, if you look at, where business is really booming at the Trump Organization, it's in things like golf, in licensing deals for his name abroad. So in areas where perhaps his political, name brand helps.
Right. I was going to say, you're the wealth reporter, right? So what kind of wealth have we seen in the Trump Organization or change in that wealth in the last 8 years?
I mean, as recently as last year, the Trump Organization had it was staring down the barrel of some very, very serious problems. One of the big dark clouds hanging over the company is the New York civil judgment of about $500 million that it was hit with last year. And Trump's lawyers are appealing that case, but there's been a kind of a dark financial cloud hanging over the company. What the company hopes will happen is that with some of these, with licensing deals and many of the other kind of strategies they've taken abroad, they'll be just fine. And that's that's one thing that came up in our conversation with Eric Trump, who leads the company.
Well, this is a really nicely done and well in-depth story. What's the most interesting thing that you learned through your reporting?
It was interesting to talk to ethics experts about the Trump Organization, who said that in Trump's first presidency, there was a real crush of scrutiny on the company. It was kind of all fresh, and now some of them said there's a little bit less. It's taken as more of a given. It's more in the fabric of the Trump presidency the second time around that there will be these conflicts with his company, which sits in a trust managed by his family. So it was interesting to see the arc of the maybe outcry over conflicts, and it's absolutely something to keep watching, even though we've had Trump at the forefront of American politics for a very long time now.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Annie. Annie Massa, Bloomberg Wealth Reporter. Definitely check it out on the terminal. Trump's Canceled Empire makes a comeback rivaling political rise. It's a good read, a lot of in-depth pieces in there, so stay tuned to that. Back to the news at the top of the 10 o'clock hour, the Supreme Court upholding the ban on TikTok, and the question then becomes what happens on Sunday? What happens to Nora when she plans her next trip? Thailand apparently is planned, but the next trip, that's a problem. Mandeep Singh is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Tech Industry Analyst. He'll be joining us right after this on that point. Taking a look at the market, the Nasdaq continues to outperform, up by 1.6%, the S&P up over 1%, and Dow Jones.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all powering higher. A rally in the world's largest tech companies driving stocks toward their best week since the November presidential election. Just ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday. We'll have a whole lot more on the tech world with our Mandeep Singh coming up in just a moment here on Bloomberg Intelligence. Right to the numbers with the S&P holding above 6,000, just about the best level of the session right now. 6,007 on that index, up 70, a gain of 1.2%. The Dow up 454, now up 1%. NASDAQ up 1.6%. The Russell 2000 index gaining as well, up by 0.5%. The 10-year 4.61%, with the 2-year 4.27%. Gold up $1.50 the ounce, little change there at $27.15. And West Texas Intermediate crude just below 78 a barrel, 77.79 right now, down by 0.9%. Monday, Donald Trump will be sworn in as president. Phil Camporial is portfolio manager at JP Morgan Investment Management. And this morning on Surveillance, he talked about markets under the incoming Trump administration.
We wouldn't be overweight 9% in stocks if we, in a 60-40 portfolio, if we believe that the tariff issue was going to hurt kind of growth and earnings and things like that. I think that the bigger positive is the pro-business environment.
Phil Camporial of JP Morgan Investment Management. And we are just getting word, with sources telling Bloomberg, that officials are considering moving President-elect Donald Trump's second inauguration indoors because of the extreme cold that is in the forecast for Washington on Monday. Either way, we got you covered here on Bloomberg Radio. Yes, complete coverage of the inauguration on Monday. Recapping, S&P up 70, a gain right now of 1.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you, Charlie. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We're coming up on a long weekend with MLK Day and Inauguration Day on Monday, but lots to keep an eye on in the markets today. As Charlie said, markets are rallying this morning. We're seeing all three major indexes in the green and pushing higher. I'm Nora Melinda here with Alex Steele. Paul Sweeney's out today. We're here in the studio with Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Technology Analyst Mandeep Singh, and we're discussing the headline this morning that the Supreme Court is upholding a law that could shut down TikTok in the United States. So Mandeep, what were your biggest takeaways from these headlines when you think about your coverage and tech stocks?
Well, one, that TikTok will go dark come January 19th, and it's a very likely outcome now that, Supreme Court has upheld the decision. The other thing is, you keep hearing about President Trump talking to, the Chinese president. And look, most likely there will be an executive order next week. Now, what will be in that executive order is TBD, but chances are it has to do with either delaying the ban or, buying some more time to orchestrate a deal. Or the other thing that's possible is the migration of data. Because right now, that's something that hasn't come up a great deal. The reason why Meta and YouTube haven't really benefited from all this talk about TikTok ban is because the creators who are on TikTok platform don't really have a choice when it comes to using these alternative platforms. All their data is inside TikTok. So migrating that data would make a difference. And if there was a way that government could tell TikTok to do it, even if it goes dark, I think that would make a difference in terms of giving these users an option to migrate their data.
So, Mandeep, I learned something from Nora today, which is that she uses TikTok as like a Google search engine, and that the filters are so good, and it really helps her plan trips and cook and all that. And I hadn't thought of TikTok like that. My bad. What is it that makes... what are the algorithm of TikTok is so valuable? What is it that they do that others can't seem to replicate?
Yeah, I mean, great points. And Amazon is also used as a search engine. So to your point, all these platforms that have got a lot of engagement, over 150 million users logging into the app every day, spending time, they use it for search. And it goes beyond the content. So it's the same Amazon comparison as well. And that's where, if these users are allowed to migrate their data to, let's say, YouTube or Meta Reels, then even though the algorithm for those companies is different from what TikTok has, but at least you have a baseline thing to know, okay, these are all my followers. These are, they consume the content. The algorithm may be slightly different, but you are still going to be able to interact with those users. And I think the search aspect is quite interesting because over time, all these companies are able to leverage AI to really, become a search engine. I mean, that's what Meta is doing with Meta AI. It's really a Google competitor.
Right.
And so OpenAI and all these companies really flogging into that search market. So I do think there is that search use case, but the most important thing for users is to be able to take over their data to some other platform.
So one thing that Alex and I have been talking about this morning is just the idea of the impact on small businesses and content creators, as you pointed out. Talk to me a bit more about what you mean about the idea of moving your data from TikTok to potentially a YouTube or another competitor. Is that their videos? What exactly is the data we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, all your history on the platform. So if I'm a content creator who has been using TikTok to upload videos, I want to know who are all the users who have consumed those videos. In addition to migrating all the videos, I also want the history of the users and how they have engaged on the platform with the content that I've curated. And so once I have that and I'm able to port it over to a Snap or a Meta, it may not be exactly like for like, but at least I have a way to engage with my followers. So I think that to me is the key. Like, you may not get the exact algorithm on the other platform, but then you can recreate your business and make those changes. But at least you're not starting from scratch in terms of creating new followers and new content.
Right. And as you're thinking about competitors in this situation, are we seeing Meta, Snapchat, are they on the edge of their seat? They're waiting for this and hoping to jump in? Or what has been their reaction?
I mean, they should be courting all these creators, to my mind, through whatever means they can. And, I'm sure they are trying in their own way. But right now, if I'm a creator, my challenge is, do I really start all over again? And that's why I think there is an addiction when it comes to using TikTok, both from the creator side as well as the user side. And so I'm not that fixated on the algorithm. I mean, these companies have, very big R&D budgets to be able to come close to TikTok when it comes to algorithm. Google has changed its algorithm so many times over the years. So algorithm doesn't remain fixed. It keeps evolving as the company changes and how the environment changes, but it's the data. That's the key for me.
So we're actually going to be talking to a content creator later on television. So what would you be asking them?
Like, what is it that's preventing you from migrating your business to Reels or Snap or any other competing platform?
See,
what's the biggest friction point?
It's also like, why don't you do all of it? Right? I mean, I have no idea. I could never run my own business. It would be the death of me. I would never do it.
We're not content creators.
No, but why can't you do all of it? But maybe that's not how it works.
Yeah, and look, I mean, TikTok does have that addictive power when it comes to, how it's able to get all these followers. Like, I could be a random creator who uploads a video, and suddenly I get so many followers, people who engage with my content. I think that's unique to TikTok. But YouTube Shorts and Meta Reels have created a similar platform. It may not get me the same number of followers, but at least it'll be close to, what I'm able to do on TikTok.
And what's interesting about this entire thing is the idea of monetization. Like, people want to see where they can actually make the most money. And I actually wrote a story for the Bloomberg Terminal you can find on there about 2 years ago about the idea of how people were really migrating to TikTok for search engine capabilities. And it's interesting to think about the fact that YouTube actually apparently pays more than TikTok, but you see so many people who are so glued to TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, and that's reflected in the time spent per daily active user. So time spent per DAU is the highest on TikTok. On YouTube, it's close, but still, that's where you want to go, where the eyeballs are and where the time spent is. And TikTok has customized for e-commerce needs. TikTok Shops is quite popular outside the US. They do almost $20 billion in GMV. So clearly there is that e-commerce integration that they have cracked that no one else has.
Mandeep, super appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Mandeep Singh, Bloomberg Intelligence, Senior Technology Analyst on TikTok. Coming up, Gavin Finch is joining us, Bloomberg Senior Reporter on the investigations team on the latest into patients in IMF hospitals.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. We made it to the end of the week. I'm Alex Steele here with Norma Linda. Paul Sweeney is off today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio, and we are broadcasting to you live from our Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown in Manhattan. I mentioned earlier at the break that we'll be talking about patients being detained at hospitals that were funded by the IMF. It's actually the World Bank. I just want to correct myself. It's the World Bank. It's an in-depth report on our investigations team, and Gavin Finch is the Bloomberg senior reporter on this story. So apparently we're looking at patients that were detained and denied care at hospitals funded by the World Bank. Can you walk us through what the story is about and what led you to the story?
Sure thing. So my colleagues, Kendall Taggart, David Koshanevsky, and I, we've spent the last few months examining for-profit hospitals around the world that have received millions of dollars from, as you say, from this taxpayer-financed World Bank. It's all being done in the name of expanding access to healthcare in lower-income countries. But what we found as we kind of dug into the reality on the ground in countries like Uganda, the Philippines, Kenya, and elsewhere was a host of, you know, some of the kind of worst patient rights abuses that you can imagine, really. You know, we came across cases where hospitals detaining their patients until they could pay their medical bills, sometimes for as long as 8 days, and sometimes involving babies. Other hospitals were denying patients emergency care if they didn't have money to pay a large upfront deposit. And even holding on to the corpses of dead patients as a form of leverage until their families cleared their debts.
So what does it look like in terms of checks and balances? Who is holding these facilities accountable?
Well, although kind of many of these kinds of abuses are quite well-known risks in local markets, they crop up in local media reports, there's parliamentary debates and even legal cases about them. The IFC, which is supposed to do the sort of vetting and ongoing surveillance of these projects, just doesn't screen for these types of abuses, really. They look for other things like, that they're very up to speed on workers' rights and on whether local people are being displaced by projects. But when it comes to patient rights abuses, at least in the past, they just really haven't been looking at all.
What has been the response to your piece?
Well, from the IFC, they have now said in response to the sort of questions that we put to them or following those, that in future they will now vet for patient rights abuses. So any new projects that they are looking to invest in, they will screen for patient rights abuses. And they've said that it will be a condition of investing that their clients agree to those binding principles.
What was the most shocking experience or story that you heard through your reporting?
Well, two of the cases that we focus on in the story were the most shocking. One was a very sick baby, 1-year-old, who was convulsing and struggling to breathe. And she was kept in the reception of a hospital in Uganda, even though she was clearly in quite some distress. She wasn't treated for about 30 minutes while hospital staff basically waited for a credit card to arrive. As soon as that credit card did arrive, she was whisked straight through to see a doctor and on into the ICU. And then when she was well enough to actually then leave the hospital after a few days, she was told she couldn't because her bill had not been fully paid off. It took her another 2 days to manage to scramble to get that money together so that she could go home. In another case in the Philippines, we tell the story of a guy who was a young man who said the hospital cut off his antibiotic medicines after his unpaid bill exceeded a certain level, and then detained him for almost a week while he struggled to raise the money to pay the hospital back.
Oh my gosh, is there insurance in these countries? How does that work?
So in the case of the Philippines, the chap I just mentioned, he had private medical insurance, but it only covers a very small amount. There is equally government insurance, but again, it covers a very small amount. And in both Uganda and the Philippines, private medical care is very, very expensive. So you can quite easily find yourself, a middle-class sort of person, earning a good salary, can go from being comfortable to being really in a great deal of financial distress in a month or two.
Do we have any of these hospitals that are funded by the World Bank in Western regions, or are there just certain specific countries that are there?
So it's not really in the West so much. These investments were part of a $9 billion healthcare investment initiative led by the World Bank's investment arm, the International Finance Corporation. And the idea behind it is to, fill the kind of yawning gap in healthcare needs in lower income countries by leveraging taxpayer funds to, to get more private investment, basically going into private hospitals.
Hey, Gavin, we gotta leave it there.
The reality
is very different. Yeah, Gavin, we gotta leave it there. Gavin Finch, a Bloomberg senior reporter on investigations team. Definitely check it out. It's today's big take, and talks about how patients were detained at hospitals that were funded by the World Bank. Nora, it was a pleasure.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you for helping my brain survive Friday.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Happy
Long
Friday to all of
weekend.
you as well. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew is up next after this global news update.
is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. Trouble for millions of TikTok users as the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld the law that will ban it in this country come Sunday. Colin Jones is CEO of a private jet company that has used the platform for promotions.
At the end of the day, great content does great on all platforms. So whether that's on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, whatever it is, we look forward to hopefully seeing our 1.9 million followers kind of transition over those platforms as well.
Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley and other lawmakers in both parties have called the Chinese-owned app a national security threat.
There's no need for TikTok to shut down if China will allow TikTok to be sold. But for months now, Beijing has refused to entertain what I understand are multiple offers.
After the ruling, Donald Trump said he must have time to decide on whether to enforce the ruling once he assumes the presidency on Monday. CBS's Nancy Cordes.
President-elect Trump says that he held a phone call with the president of China. He said that they talked about trade and they talked about TikTok. He went on to assure the world that he and Xi Jinping were going to do some great things together.
There's word today of some discussion about possibly moving Monday's swearing-in ceremony indoors in Washington because of the cold weather forecast. Final call to be made by President-elect Trump. Israel's security cabinet has approved the Gaza ceasefire deal today, first step toward final approval. CBS's Rami Inocencio in Tel Aviv.
Israel would free up to 1,000 Palestinian detainees for 33 Israeli hostages. Women, the elderly, the sick, and children.
I'm having mixed feelings.
But Eli David has to wait longer. His brother, Avatar, would be released later in Phase 2.
It's torturing.
But not all Israelis want the deal. Some want it to fail, seeing it as a surrender to Hamas terror.
The Trump cabinet pick, who would play a key role in planned mass deportations as Homeland Security Secretary, is before a Senate committee.
Kristi Noem is the governor of South Dakota and a former member of the House of Representatives, so she approaches the job with a unique perspective.
I've addressed important issues like cybersecurity, human trafficking, drug interdiction,
which would be many of the same issues she would address as Homeland Security Secretary.
We must secure our borders against illegal trafficking and immigration. We must safeguard our critical infrastructure to make sure that we're protected against cyber attacks, respond to natural disasters.
She also referenced the recent terror attack in New Orleans while fielding questions about homegrown terror threats. Linda Kenyon, CBS News, the White House.
Wall Street, the Dow is up 400 points. This is CBS News.
/free.
Musicians will come together to help Southern California wildfire victims.
The concert's confirmed. Billie Eilish, Gwen Stefani, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Joni Mitchell are among a slate of musicians who will come together to raise money for the wildfire victims.
Flows and flows of angels.
Dave Matthews and John Mayer will perform together for the first time ever at Fire Aid on January 30th at both the Intuit Dome in Inglewood and nearby Kia Forum simultaneously. They'll be broadcast, streamed, and shown at AMC Theaters Live. Tickets for the show go on sale next Wednesday. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
Deep in the heart of flu season, the CDC says at least 15 states have very high levels of influenza. Hardest hit now is most of New England, the Deep South, and the Far West. COVID rates are highest in the upper Midwest. I'm Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
It will be the first indoor inauguration since Reagan. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Donald Trump makes it official this hour, the ceremony is moving inside the Capitol because of bitter cold temperatures in the forecast. We're going to talk about the logistics and just what you should expect on Monday with Republican strategist Lisa Camuso Miller, of course, veteran of the Republican Speaker's office. She's been there and done that. SCOTUS says block the talk, upholding the divest or ban law this morning, but that does not mean the app is going away. Quite the contrary. We'll have a lot more with Matt Schettenhelm and Nathan Dean from Bloomberg Intelligence, another breaker we're following, with analysis today from our signature panel. They're both with us, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis for the hour. As we turn to Wall Street first to set the baseline, Friday trade with Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. Happy Friday, and what a week for U.S. equity markets. On the week, looking for the best week since the election, up 3% on the S&P. Stocks ripping higher today at or near session highs. Right to the numbers with the S&P right now advancing 66, 6,003 where we stand, up 1.1%. We've got the Dow up 1%, up 425 points. NASDAQ right now up 300. That is a gain of 1.5%. 10-year, 4.61%, with a 2-year, 4.27%. Gold down $1 the ounce, 27.13. Little change there. And West Texas Intermediate crude, a retreat there, down 0.4%, 78.39 a barrel on WTI. So the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Intel shares also gaining. We're at Intel right now up by 7.8%. Intel advancing after a report on a tech news website that said the beleaguered chip maker is an acquisition target. That word coming from Semi-Accurate, which is a tech-focused newsletter. Again, Intel shares, they're rallying now by 7.8%. Recapping, stocks higher, S&P right now up by 1.1%. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, thank you, sir. Grab a shovel and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power. You made it to the threshold of the weekend here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, too. You can find us on YouTube any day. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. We keep the stream running all day from D.C. and New York. And you're always welcome in our studios. As we get ready to shiver this weekend here in Washington, welcome to Fortress D.C. I don't even know how to get to work anymore with so many streets closed. 30 miles of security fencing. We're told hundreds of thousands on the way into town. There is not a hotel room to be had. I know this firsthand. After looking at the forecast, we have a major update on the plan for Monday. The headline in the Washington Post, home of the Capitol weather gang. Accumulating snow could fall Sunday before brutal cold on Inauguration Day. And yeah, boy, that's going to be it. 9 degrees, says the Google, a 9-degree low, high of 24. And when you're on the west front of the Capitol at that time of day, this time of year, you're in shadow for the whole time. And so Donald Trump now has a new reason to compare himself to Ronald Reagan. The headline screaming, inauguration moves indoors for the first time in 40 years, making us all feel a little bit older. Yeah, that was 1985. Remember, Ronald Reagan? It was 7 degrees outside. It's going to be 9 on Monday. Barack Obama, remember 2008? It was 10. Balmy. And so Donald Trump takes to Truth Social. January 20th cannot come fast enough, he says. Everybody, even those that initially opposed a victory, he says, by Donald Trump, just want it to happen. Out of his obligation to protect the people of our country, he says, we have to think of the inauguration itself, pointing to the forecast, the wind chill factor, which would be sub-zero. He doesn't want to see people hurt or injured in any way. And so, yes, he says, I have ordered the inauguration address, in addition to prayers and other speeches, to be delivered in the United States Capitol Rotunda, as was used by Ronald Reagan in 1985, also because of very cold weather. So not only is every field producer at every television network in Washington freaking out right now because it's going to be a whole different show, So too are those in the Capitol. Think of the logistics that are going to have to be changed. Lisa Camuso Miller joins us now, of course, a veteran of the Republican-led House of Representatives, a veteran of the Speaker's office, former RNC communications director. It's great to see you, Lisa. Are you cold already? And can you believe this is moving inside? What does this mean for the plan?
Well, I mean, you know, look, these are the kinds of contingencies that Secret Service and law enforcement and the Capitol consider every single time we inaugurate a president. So the fact that they've advised this, that they think that this is the right counsel is good. I mean, it makes it different, and I can feel the scramble sort of amongst all of the TV and the media folks for sure. But all of these contingencies are always built in, regardless of what the weather's going to be. Joe, I was there in 2001. My gosh, 24 years ago now. And it was pretty cold then when George W. Bush was inaugurated, and it was raining, and it was really, there were so many people out on the lawn. I actually saw a report, Joe, that perhaps they're going to open Capital One Arena, and I'm not so sure about what those details are, but there's a lot of...
Well, we've got news on that, as a matter of fact. Now that you brought, I hate to interrupt you, Lisa, but I left that part out. Donald Trump writes, we will open Capital One Arena on Monday for live viewing of this historic event and to host the presidential parade. There's more. I will join the crowd at Capital One after my swearing in. So the night earlier, he's got the big night before pep rally or whatever we're calling it in that same space. Lisa, how in the world are all these people going to fit in there, complete with Secret Service level security for a newly sworn in president of the United States? I'm guessing you don't want to go anywhere near it.
Well, I mean, just like any other big event, I mean, it certainly will be one to get into. And you know, as they allow for these tickets, each one of these tickets have tiers, right? So every one of them, people get chances to sit up close. So there'll be lots of opportunity. But, you know, as much as this feels like a major shift, it's also one of those things that when you're moving the president of the United States, there are contingencies for everything. And when you watch these things unfold, they have already considered all of these options. So for those of us who are watching at home, luckily we get to stay warm. I could not imagine sitting on the West Front and watching that happen in 9-degree weather with snow, perhaps.
Yeah. So you make a great point. And boy, I was there too in 2001. I remember my poor mother shivering outside in what was freezing rain. Right? There was mud on the ground, freezing rain falling. George W. Bush and Bill Clinton are up there in this miserable weather up on the platform. And, you know, they talked about moving it inside potentially that year, too, which did not end up happening. So this is like a combination of George W. Bush's swearing in with we're going to get snow and freezing rain, and then the temperatures that Ronald Reagan experienced. That's a pretty nasty combination. Does Donald Trump actually like this idea because he doesn't have to prove crowd size if they move it inside?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, you know, but the other thing, too, is that I think that more than anything else in these circumstances, Joe, more than any other, I think the one thing that I saw that the president-elect has noted is that law enforcement and those people that are out all day long, it's less about those of us who are sitting in the audience and even less about those who get brought in right before the event starts. It's those who are really on the front lines, who are there making sure. I mean, you mentioned those thousands of they're everywhere you go in the city is closed off because of security. And so there is a huge amount of impact beyond just sort of the pomp and circumstance of the day that really affects just about everybody. So this really is probably a very good call for a very cold day, and one that I think those who are around the capital region are probably somewhat relieved, although they will still definitely be in their posts and working those checkpoints.
All right, so Lisa Camuso Miller has her endorsement here on moving this inside. By the way, if you want a little color from the ground here in the capital city, Lisa, we got to work just in the last 24 hours. Overnight, these Jersey barriers showed up. They must have been dropping them all night. They must have had the trucks out all night. So on each corner of each intersection, there's a pile of these concrete barriers. Presumably, they will all be put in place along the side of the road at some point over the weekend here. But we're in shutdown mode, quite like we've never seen. Donald Trump goes on to write in this very long truth post. Wish I could read the whole thing to you here. It's just such classic Trump. It's not just the people, Lisa, the law enforcement, the first responders. He says it's the police canines and even the horses. The horses would be too cold, Lisa, if you were worried about them.
Well, those guys will still be out. I'm sure they'll still be out and about because they have a job to do.
What happens to all the people on the mall? I mean, they're going to have to put it on the Jumbotron, right? Not everyone's going to fit in the Capital One Arena or want to go in there.
For sure. And it makes you wonder how many people will come out because it will be cold. And it's going to be, regardless, I think that the crowd sizes, as we joke about the crowd sizes here, they'll be interesting to see because with the cold and with the indoor programming, perhaps that means that people stay home. But also, too, as you said, Joe, it's nearly impossible to get around the city right now because of all of the safety precautions that have been put in place, not only because of a variety of different reasons, but also because the city itself still has to function. It is also MLK Day on Monday, so it is a federal holiday, so at least the workforce will not be trying to get into the city, but this is still a functioning city, one that happens and moves regardless of whatever pomp and circumstances happening throughout the day. So it'll be interesting to see how it comes together.
I think I'm going to swim across the Potomac. I've decided that will be my way to get into the district.
You don't
Apologies
have a
if you're not in the
Joe?
Washington area. No, I haven't actually managed to do that yet. I thought maybe I'd borrow yours. I don't mean to get too local for people who aren't in D.C., but this is what's happening right now. In our remaining minute, and I'm setting you up. Tell me what you expect from the speech on Monday, whether it's indoors or out. Do we get American carnage as we did in his original swearing in, or is there something more optimistic?
It feels like the tone and the tenor to me, just based on sort of some of the messaging that I'm seeing, is going to be one about offering hope, offering those that big red swath across the country that voted in favor of change and voted in favor of the Trump administration. I think we're going to hear about things that are going to happen right away. Those kinds of movements, those kinds of executive orders, those kinds of legislative actions that this Congress and this administration are working already to make sure that they put in place and have happen. And so I would expect that it would be a lighter tone and tenor, more with optimism and hope for change, because I think that that's the legacy he's hoping to leave behind as we get into this next administration.
Well, I'm happy to tell you, you'll be able to listen to it right here, watch it right here, Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, Bloomberg TV as well. Kaylee and I will start at 11 a.m. Eastern Time with special coverage. Great to see you, Lisa, as always. I thought that would be just right for today. Lisa Camuso-Miller, the former RNC Communications Director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, who knows a thing or two about what happens on Capitol Hill. We've got a lot more to talk about next. A SCOTUS ruling on TikTok. It's straight ahead, right here on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks higher across the board. We're holding near session highs. Going to be an up week as well. On the week right now, the S&P is up by roughly 3%. Right to the numbers, here's where we stand. S&P set for the best week since November, with the S&P up 72 at 6,010, up 1.2%. The Dow up 466 now, up 1.1%. Nasdaq Composite Index up 320. That is a gain of 1.7%. 10-year, 4.61%. The 2-year, 4.27%. Gold down $3 the ounce. Little change, down 0.1%. 27.11 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude, 78.32 a barrel. And Bitcoin ripping higher now by 4.7%. Bitcoin at 104,867 on Bitcoin. Bank earnings, Truist Financial reporting net interest income broadly in line with analyst estimates. Truist up by 4.8%. PNC Financial Group and U.S. Bancorp, two of the biggest regional banks, gave muted predictions for net interest income in the first quarter. Shares of both banks right now are trading little changed. We've got PNC up 2.8%, U.S. Bancorp up by just about 0.4%. As we have been reporting, President-elect Donald Trump says he will move his swearing-in ceremony and inaugural address indoors due to extreme cold forecasts. It is forecast for Washington on Monday. Yes, complete coverage right here on Bloomberg Radio. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much indeed. The inauguration moves indoors. It's quite a forecast. We're going to get snow and rain, I guess, on Sunday night when they're doing the big victory rally at the Capital One Arena. The interesting part of this, not only are they going to do the swearing in, they're going to go inside the rotunda, do the whole bit. Can you imagine the seating arrangement, what they're dealing with? Just on egos alone, as this moves inside, you know who's going to be on that platform. It's every major CEO from high tech, including TikTok, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But then he goes back to the arena on Monday because, you know, if he's not going to stand in front of a million people on the mall, wants to get in front of a crowd. Capital One Arena, Monday, he says, a live viewing of this historic event. Then I will join the crowd after my swearing in. This is going to have to be a Kid Rock thing there, right? So the big news before this happened was TikTok. At 10 o'clock in the morning, we saw it coming, SCOTUS, with a ruling. They upheld the law. They upheld the ban or divest or ban law that no one seems to like anymore. Interesting development over the hours of last evening that you might have heard about here. Before the SCOTUS ruled in, Joe Biden says he's not going to enforce the ban. That was supposed to take effect this weekend, right, the 19th. So he's basically leaving this to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is kind of all about TikTok now. Matt Schettenhelm's been knee-deep in this for months and months and months, analyzing and reporting for Bloomberg Intelligence, and I'm glad to say he's at the table with us right now. Matt, thank you for coming in. So, you know, you just read the headline, you think, wow, TikTok's going down this weekend, but these two presidents, outgoing and incoming, seem to have different ideas. Lawmakers who want to sympathize with Donald Trump suddenly love TikTok, even though it was a danger to America 5 minutes ago. What's going to happen this weekend? Does it go dark, or is there an interruption?
Well, TikTok told the Supreme Court last Friday that if the Supreme Court rules this way, it will go dark on Sunday. So it's a really interesting question. And the key thing here is it's not necessarily up to the president. Congress passed this law, and it makes any company that makes TikTok available on Sunday or after that date liable for $5,000 per user. TikTok has 170 million users. You do that math, you get to over $800 billion in liability. So if you're a company that makes TikTok available, are you going to take the president's word on that? Or do you say, look, if you want us to keep making TikTok available, change the law, go back to Congress?
So let's delineate, though. Are we talking about it being available in the app stores, or are we talking about what's actually on our phones, because we were told, well, if they do ban it, it'll basically kind of fade out. You won't be able to upgrade it at some point or update the app, but it's not like it's going to disappear from your phone. So what would happen in that?
Exactly right. So the app won't disappear from your phone, but what the law says is that any company that, one, carries it in an app store and continues to make that available, but also any internet hosting service.
Really?
So these companies that make TikTok work on the back end.
Yeah.
So TikTok likely works with Oracle. It might work with other cloud computing companies to make all these videos load for you.
Got it.
Companies can't operate within the United States to make the app keep updating for American users unless they're willing to believe this promise that, hey, we won't enforce it if President Trump comes out and says something like that. And to me, that's a huge risk to take. If I'm a company, I'm not sure I would take it.
Is there an expectation? And of course, again, we've already referenced the CEO of TikTok to be at the inauguration, which you might have a take on. It's a remarkable bit of optics that we're going to have, I guess. I wonder, will he be seated in the rotunda now that this is shrinking? That could be the first or one of the first EOs from Donald Trump, right, to turn this around? Or would it have to be congressional action to undo the law?
I think we may see both. But the point, though, is that an executive order from President Trump can't change the law. He can say, look, I'm not going to enforce this law, but he can't go and change the fact that these companies face all this liability. So the logical path to change the law is to go back to Congress. I did think that ByteDance and TikTok had some good news yesterday when Chuck Schumer came out and said, look,
wasn't that something?
Yeah, we need to sell this app. We need to force a sale, but maybe we need to give them more time.
Referring to the thousands or millions of influencers who make a living, they wouldn't be making money this weekend under that scenario.
That's right. I think it could go dark temporarily, and then there's a question of, can Congress fix it and maybe push it out another 270 days to force that sale.
Is somebody really buying this thing? Is Elon buying it? What's happening with that?
The biggest question in my view is, will ByteDance sell it?
Yeah.
So even before you talk about who's going to go buy it, will ByteDance sell it? Will China allow a sale? And any sale, is it going to involve the algorithm? And what good is getting TikTok if you don't get the algorithm? So to me, that's the hang up on the sale. We need ByteDance to be willing to sell first.
I told you, he's been living this stuff. You're the perfect person to talk to right now, Matt. Thank you so much. Matt Schettenhelm at the great Bloomberg Intelligence, the home of Nathan Dean. He's going to come and talk to us next. We'll let you know what happens at TikTok over the weekend, or you can just look at your phone. It's a big political situation here in Washington, obviously. This coming a day after Scott Bessent testified on Capitol Hill, and we're hearing he could be at least close to a day one confirmation, our next Treasury Secretary, who had a lot to say about tariffs and, yes, taxes, specifically the 2017 Trump tax cuts. Let's listen.
This is the single most important economic issue of the day. This is pass-fail. That if we do not fix these tax cuts, if we do not renew and extend, then we will be facing an economic calamity. And as always, with financial instability, that falls on the middle and working class people.
We get into it now with Bloomberg Intelligence's senior U.S. policy analyst. Is Paul Sweeney going to be upset with me for doing all this BI? They're the best in the business. Nathan's phone's been ringing. We talk about it every week here. Good to see you, Nathan Dean. About confirmations now, or is it just foregone that Trump's getting his team?
Well, I think that he's going to get most of his team. I mean, look, from the GOP perspective, you can only reject a couple of those. And I think based off of the Democratic questions we saw this week, a lot of that is being saved for Tulsi Gabbard and, Patel over at the FBI. Right. So I think a lot of the questions, look, Senator Marco Rubio, he's going to have the easiest path to confirmation. Scott Bessent, he's going to get a lot of Democratic votes.
Yes.
Even the Pete Hegseth hearing with Secretary of Defense, the Democrats were sort of curtailed in their criticism of him, which makes me think that a lot of these nominees are going to get through.
So how did he do yesterday in making the argument that what you think about tariffs might not be true, that we have our own approach, that the composite of all of our policies will in fact spur growth, not inflation or balloon deficits? Is the market buying this? Because you look at the bond market, and I'm wondering.
So, I don't think the market, so let's just back up. The market, I think, views Scott Bessent as the moderate voice when it comes to these tariff arguments, especially when you compare him to Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary nominee, and so forth like that. However, Scott Bessent has said, and in that confirmation hearing, he said these tariffs are coming. Yes. It's just a matter of how hard and how high and how quickly, or is it going to be a way to conduct negotiations? And I think that's the Wall Street view here. The Wall Street view is that come Monday, when these executive orders are signed, there's still going to be wiggle room. Now, he may be in the minority here, but I would also argue that, when it comes to tariffs, there are a lot of other groups involved, Commerce, USTR, and so forth like that. Right. And I think Scott Bessent's message, why, he answered a lot about the tariffs initially, he focused a lot more in the hearing on tax reform because I think that for him, the tax extensions of 2017 are the most important thing for him in 2025.
Well, and he's framing it as we don't do this, as we just heard, the biggest tax cut, tax hike rather, on the middle class. But when you start talking about phasing in tariffs or some of the other ideas that have come about, it's creating a new level of uncertainty. Would Wall Street rather know what's going to happen, even if it's across the board 10% tariffs, versus being uncertain about potentially lower tariffs that would be friendlier to an investor?
So obviously when you get certainty, you at least get the ability to do what, you can react to it. So, but there are a couple ways that President Trump will put these tariffs into place, and most of them involve ordering the Department of Commerce to conduct a study and then come back in 2 to 3 months, and those negotiations take place. I think Wall Street would actually prefer that route. Okay. However, President Trump does have the ability to declare an economic disaster, and these tariffs, we looked into it. All you have to do is go over to customs and change a number and hit enter.
How about that?
And these numbers go up and these tariffs take place. That would be much more of a shock, and I think Wall Street really wouldn't want that. However, he did this back in 2019 as well with Mexico. Representatives from Mexico City came to Washington. There was a negotiation, and those tariff threats never actually came into fruition. So we continue to believe that, yes, we are going to see an executive order on Monday about tariffs, but we continue to believe that this executive order maybe put out a small tariff, but will lead to further negotiations before the high tariff takes into place.
Do we get crypto EOs on Monday? And where are we on this National Reserve? I still don't understand how it works. Maybe you can tell me if this is going to happen.
Yeah, so I think we are going to get a cryptocurrency executive order. It will be one of those more symbolic ones saying the cryptocurrency is going to be like a national priority or something like that. Got it. But what you're talking about is this idea of a cryptocurrency, sovereign wealth fund, if you will.
Fort Knox of Bitcoin.
Exactly.
How do you do that?
Senator Lummis from Wyoming is heavily involved. The idea here is that you would potentially buy 5% of the world's Bitcoin. Wow. Now, I think what will happen is the United States has approximately around 212,000 Bitcoin through enforcement actions. Right. Some of it is sprinkled over our Commerce, some of it our Treasury. And President Trump could put an executive order out saying, look, let's put that together and call that the sovereign wealth fund. Okay. But President Trump has also voiced support for U.S.-based cryptocurrencies, which is not Bitcoin. So if I'm a holder of Bitcoin and I want this to go up to $175,000, and President Trump is looking at U.S.-based cryptocurrencies,
there's a conversation. We're totally out of time. There's a conversation in the MAGA social media world that believes the government will sell all of that seized crypto just to drive the price down and embarrass Donald Trump. Could that happen?
Well, Senator Lummis actually spoke against some of the selling that occurred yesterday. So we'll see.
What happened yesterday? Is that what they're doing?
Some of the U.S. Marshals sold a little bit of Bitcoin.
So it's happening. A little bit.
A little bit.
We have to talk more about that. Let's check the price of Bitcoin while we're at it, because this is Bloomberg. It's looking pretty good. Back above $104,000, up 5%. That's Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. Our panel's next on Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got a Friday rally underway with the S&P 500 index on track for a 3% weekly gain. S&P right now up 73, holding at 6,010. That is a gain of 1.2% today. The Dow up almost 500 points, up 492 now, up by 1.1%. NASDAQ advancing 321, up 1.7%. 10-year at 4.60% with a 2-year right now, 4.26%. Gold down $2.50 the ounce, down by about 0.1%, 27.12. West Texas Intermediate crude at 78.24 a barrel, down 0.6%. Bitcoin, Joe was just talking about that. We got Bitcoin at 104,500 even right now. Bitcoin surging by 4.3%. As for market sentiment ahead of the incoming Trump administration, Stephen Ricciotto is chief economist at Mizuho Securities USA.
You've unleashed animal spirits even before they've actually executed anything whatsoever. You have a change in mindset. Look at what's happened in terms of M&A activity. The announced deals have picked up significantly. Why? Because we know there's a more friendly administration coming down the pipeline, so people are starting to move things. And even though we say M&A destroys jobs, it may take out some jobs initially, but it tends to create jobs over the longer term.
Stephen Ricciotto of Mizuho was interviewed on Bloomberg Surveillance. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld a law threatening to shut down the wildly popular TikTok social media platform in the U.S. as soon as Sunday. Among U.S.-based social media companies, Meta Platforms up 0.3%, Snap Inc. down now by 0.9%. And as we have been reporting, President-elect Donald Trump says he will move his swearing-in ceremony and inaugural address indoors on Monday because of the extremely cold forecast for Monday in Washington. And of course, complete live coverage on Bloomberg Radio. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Yeah, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, sir. It's going to be cold Monday. We knew that already. 9 degrees is the forecast. And we get, I guess, some snow on Sunday night into Monday. So, yeah, they're pulling this thing indoors. My God, it's going to be a logistical party around here. When do we ban animal spirits? When do we stop saying, is it after the swearing in? Maybe after the M&A gets going? From the cliche file, we might have to put that on the same dumper as Trump 2.0 and at the end of the day. But I'll work on it. Our panel is with us, our signature panel. I thought we'd be talking about something different here today, but we have to start with the news. We'll get to TikTok and the rest. But this is, according to Donald Trump himself now, making it official. And if you're coming into the district for the inauguration, well, I guess you were already bracing for very cold and God knows what else, a lot of waiting around. And you'll have a chance to see Donald Trump. He says not only are they moving the inauguration inside, to avoid dangerous conditions, he says, for law enforcement, first responders, police canines, and even horses. But then they're going to have the rally. There'll be a Capital One Arena viewing party, so you don't have to be outside. And then Donald Trump's going to go over there. He's going to be on stage in front of this big crowd. So this just turned into, I think, a much longer experience, right? Are they still doing the parade? Do we know? I guess that's going to happen. And our signature panel is with us right now. Rick Davis, by the way, was on Ronald Reagan's inaugural committee the last time this thing had to be moved indoors. He's a Republican strategist, of course, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Bloomberg Politics contributor with Jeannie Shanzano here, Democratic analyst and political science professor at Iona University. Was this the right move, Rick? And what goes into moving an inauguration inside?
Yeah, first of all, it is the right move. When you have temperatures like this, you endanger the public who want to just come and be a part of history. And so you don't want to put them at risk. So, smart move by the Donald Trump inaugural committee and president-elect. Kudos to that. And there's an enormous amount that goes on. Sadly, so much of the mall has already been converted for large, multi-100,000 person participation in this important ceremony. And all of that basically goes away. And then you have a much more confined space inside the rotunda, in this case, to do the event. And you're right that Ronald Reagan did take the oath of office in the rotunda, but that was on day 2, January 21st.
That's right.
He actually got sworn in at the White House on the 20th. You know, being the incumbent president, you know, it was nice to get a little fire going in that Roosevelt room and never even go out to see how cold it is. And so they actually bifurcated the ceremony for a slightly warmer day on the 21st. And so, yeah, it's really quite unique to actually be sworn in inside the rotunda, for this purpose. And what's really unique is then having the rally, a second day rally. He's going to have one on the 19th, right after he's sworn in. So a lot of moving parts. They got to set that arena up now, for a second event. And you're right. What are they going to do with that parade? It'd be really cool to run that parade right through the arena, but I think they'll reserve it to Pennsylvania Avenue.
Ted Leonsis must be saying, stop, I can't take it anymore. They've got games and events all around this thing in the Capital One Arena. Jeannie, Rick is right. A lot of people don't remember that. You might not have been alive. They went to the White House for the swearing in, for the official one. Then they did a ceremonial, basically swearing in on Capitol Hill the next day. I wondered if that might be how this goes. But Jeannie, if you can be on stage in front of a bunch of adoring fans, I'm guessing Donald Trump loves this plan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he loves it or not. It is the reality, but I'm starting to see a pattern here. Are Republicans not up to the cold weather? I heard you say earlier, Joe, that in 2009, Barack Obama, it was 10 degrees? Democrats withstood it. And now we've got Reagan, and now we've got Trump. I don't know. Maybe Barack Obama would talk smack to him about it, except now they're BFFs. So I don't think they'll do that.
Did I not say that, James, before we got on the air? I'm waiting for this. I don't know. But I'm guessing that's not going to happen. The difference between 9 and 10 degrees, though, each degree counts at this point. Rick, if you're planning this, and you've been part of inaugural planning, you've got a whole rally now to take care of inside the Capital One Arena. I'm guessing you bring Kid Rock in there and do the whole thing. This is like Madison Square Garden all over again. And I'll tell you what, if it goes well, this becomes part of future inaugurations. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I don't think it sets a precedent. I mean, look, Ronald Reagan did an event, on the 21st to replace the parade at the Capitol Center, which is basically the forerunner of Capital One. And he basically took all the, sort of entertainment acts and some of the parade work and did it inside Capital One. So it is got some precedent. It's not totally unique. But look, the whole point is you've got hundreds of thousands of people who come into the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. to celebrate this inaugural. And you want to give them a party, and that's what this is going to be. It's just going to be a big, fun party. And you think about it, you're going to have the swearing in at the Rotunda, the Capital One Arena event, and then you got inaugural balls that'll go all night long. It's going to be an exhausting day for all those people ready to party on to another term of office for Donald Trump.
I'm already exhausted thinking about it. By the way, this is just between us. Before Kaylee joins us in our second hour, do you know how amazing my co-anchor is? I didn't know how I was going to get into town for this thing. And as I've been talking to you guys this hour, Kaylee found me a hotel room. So I will be here, and you, of course, will be as well. It's going to be interesting getting into the city next week. We might want to talk about that, Rick, when we have some time here. So, Jeannie, I want to give you some time because it's not just the incoming administration we're talking about, it's the outgoing one. And Joe Biden has one more spin. He has his final speech today that he's going to be delivering to say farewell, having addressed the nation the other evening from the Oval Office. Remember?
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. That's the dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms.
Jeannie, how are you feeling about the optics, about the tone right now? We're reading stories about a funeral parlor-like atmosphere inside the West Wing following that speech the other night. Is this a dark departure? Is this the real dark Brandon?
We Wait, Joe, first of all, how am I getting into the inauguration Monday? I'm calling you and Kaylee and Rick because I don't know how to get there.
Are you going to be down here with us? You're going to be here.
I'm going to be down there.
All right,
and
so
I know I'm supposed to focus on Joe Biden, but now I can't get over how I get into the city. So I'm going to call you.
We're going to have to meet up at like
Rick.
the Waffle House and carpool. It's going to be a big BOP carpool on Monday morning,
Yes,
Jeannie. We're looking
thank
out for you.
Sorry. Now back to business.
No, yeah.
So, I think the message on the other night by Joe Biden, the message was right, but unfortunately the messenger is wrong. Nothing he can do about that, of course. I do think his warning about oligarchy and a rising oligarchy is something of concern. Just consider it. There's about 7 companies driving the stock market right now. We've got Elon Musk with an office in the White House, some people calling him the co-president. We've got Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman. We've got the president of TikTok, all going to be at that inaugural with Donald Trump, not just in the audience like the rest of us. So, this is a huge, enormous concern. It's not just a concern in the US, and it's not a new concern. It's a concern that goes back to the Occupy Wall Street movement and those issues, enormous wealth, and the amount that they are able to influence the government. Because let's not forget, he's not only in charge of Doge in the ear of the president, but Elon Musk is also the nation's largest government, or one of the largest government contractors. And he's not alone. I don't want to pick on Elon. So, it is a concern. It's the right message Biden gave, but it is not, I'm not sure it's the right messenger. So the Democrats need to rethink this.
Boy, there's a lot there, Jeannie. Occupy Wall Street. Think about that for a minute and what we could be seeing in the next year here in Washington. Rick, what do you think? You know Joe Biden. You talked about this the other day. This is not the Joe Biden that you think you know. What's with the sort of bitter departure here, the tone? And do you really think that he's going to have breakfast with Donald Trump on Monday morning? I haven't heard a peep about that.
Yeah, I can't tell about the personal relationship between the Trumps and the Bidens. Obviously, the first time we've really seen them together was at the Carter funeral, and it was formality at best, right? I mean, kind of hard to tell. While Donald Trump and Barack Obama were having a laugh riot, very bizarre. But the bottom line is that Joe Biden is a traditionalist. He's been around 53 years in public office at the highest levels. If he is expected at breakfast, he'll be there, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things he takes extremely seriously. And the question there is whether Donald Trump will take the offer. I am shocked by the negative tone of his farewell address and subsequent interviews. This whole idea of the American oligarchy it just seems out of context with who we are as a country. And I would remind Joe Biden that over the last 4 years, the oligarchy he's describing made $1.5 trillion. I mean, what was he doing about it for the last 4 years if he thought that was such a big and important issue? And where was that at the State of the Union address this last year or in other subsequent campaign addresses he gave all along? So I just thought it was kind of this maybe throwaway line at the end of his speech, but it took up a lot of oxygen, and I thought highly inappropriate sort of gift to give to the incoming administration on such a negative tone.
Well, he's not done yet. I'm sure we still are waiting for these preemptive pardons or what might follow this weekend. Really interesting reporting in the Washington Post talking about this just flurry of activity at the very end here, removing Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terror, blocking the U.S. steel purchase, extending temporary protected status for 1 million immigrants. I could keep going on here. The student loan forgiveness. Post says this all started in September when Biden dropped out of the race. In fact, in July, things started to accelerate in terms of what will be our closing act. We'll talk more about that coming up in our second hour. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano stay with us. We got to get hotels for these guys. Our signature panel is going to be part of our special coverage on Monday, and I hope that you'll be able to watch this from the comfort of your own home if you're not screaming over there in the Capital One Arena. Starts 11 a.m. Washington time, special inaugural coverage. I'll be here alongside Kaylee Lyons, who will be with us in our next hour here on Balance of Power as we turn our attention back to this TikTok ruling. SCOTUS upholding the law to block the talk. But Donald Trump has different ideas, and we'll get into that coming up next on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The inauguration will take place under the dome. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Donald Trump makes it official today, Monday's ceremony is moving inside the Capitol because of bitter cold temperatures here in the capital city, much like we saw Ronald Reagan do 40 years ago. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thanks for being with us here on the Friday edition of Balance of Power. Kaylee, it's going to be 9 degrees out on Monday, and this sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Well, 9 degrees is the actual temperature.
That's
the real
true.
feel is going to be even lower than this. So one could understand why not everyone is willing to spend hours outside on a freezing Monday morning here in Washington. But yes, you're exactly right. Capital One Arena is now going to be a place that needs to be coordinated, as Donald Trump, according to his post on True Social, says people can watch his remarks after he's sworn in from there. Then the parade, I guess, will go to Capital One. So for 2 days in a row, he'll be rallying at the arena. At least that's what he suggested, though. I'm not sure all of those details have been finalized. This is a moving.
Have they talked to Ted Leonsis about this yet? So he's going to go to Capital One after the swearing in. There'll be a whole other rally, basically 2 days in a row. It's like Madison Square Garden all over again.
Well, to read the quote, we will open Capital One Arena on Monday for live viewing of this historic event and to host the presidential parade. I will join the crowd at Capital One after my swearing in. All other events remain the same, including the victory rally at Capital One Arena on Sunday at 3 p.m. So there you go.
Overnight, all these Jersey barriers appeared. It's going to be really hard to get around here. The street closures are already taking effect. The security fencing is in place, and now we have a massive change in the program, something we'll be talking about with our signature panel on this day, Kaylee, that we got a TikTok ruling.
Yeah, as soon as Donald Trump is sworn in, he's pretty quickly going to have to decide what he wants to do about the ban that TikTok should, in theory, have in place on Sunday after the Supreme Court ruled that the law that requires it to be divested or banned on that date is in fact constitutional. So we'll have to get those details, consider what happens next. Bloomberg's June Grosso and Caroline Hyde will be with us in just a few moments. But first, let's turn to Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet and get a look at where we're trading as we close out the week here. Charlie.
I thank you very much, Kaylee Lines. Joe Matthew, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all surging. We are at the best level of the day. Going to be an up week for the S&P 500 index right now. The S&P on the week up by 3.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 442 points. That's an advance of 1%. S&P up 71 at 6,008. That's a gain of 1.2%. NASDAQ now up 327 points, up 1.7%, with a 10-year at 4.60%, the 2-year 4.26%. Gold down $1 the ounce, now down by about 0.1%, 27.12 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude 78.22, down now by just about 0.6%. Cannot ignore the move in Bitcoin today, surging 4%. Bitcoin back above $104,000. Bitcoin right now at $104,134. Keeping an eye on Intel, the stock is higher after a report on a tech news site that said the beleaguered chipmaker is an acquisition target. We've got Intel up now by 8.6%. So again, recapping here, U.S. equities higher across the board. S&P right now up 70, a gain of 1.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcast. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Joe Matthew here in Washington, where the mood has changed around TikTok. If you think back to last year when both the House and the Senate, with wide bipartisan margins, signed a bill that would ban TikTok in the U.S. if it wasn't divested by its Chinese parent company, ByteDance. And President Biden signed that into law. So everyone understood what would happen come this Sunday if it wasn't divested. The 19th is the deadline, and TikTok would be banned. And the challenge in the Supreme Court to try to stop that from happening on TikTok's behalf was unsuccessful. The court ruling that in this instance, Joe, national security overrides the right to free speech. The problem is all these people, or at least a lot of them, who wanted TikTok banned in the first place are now thinking maybe not so much now that the date is actually upon us.
And having heard from Donald Trump, which changed a lot of moods. Yeah, it's really something. This was like the most bipartisan hobby in Washington for all of last year. Block the talk. And it appears to not be the case any longer. While the Supreme Court did uphold this law, Joe Biden's not going to enforce it this weekend, he says. And Donald Trump's going to change the world apparently on Monday. So we want to get to this from a couple of angles, as you expect on Bloomberg, from a legal standpoint, from a business standpoint. And that's where we start with June Grosso, the host of Bloomberg Law on Bloomberg Radio. June, this ruling is interesting, knowing, of course, that Donald Trump appointed several of these justices. What do you make of the decision?
Well, the decision follows what happened at the oral arguments, where there was basically no support for the free speech rights of TikTok and the content creators. What happened here was that the Supreme Court put national security above free speech. As you know, national security is often, when it comes into the courtroom, judges often back off because they think that the executive branch or the legislative branch has a better beat on what national security interests are important, and so they step back. And so in this case, the justices stepped back and said, we're going to leave this in the hands of the executive branch and the legislative branch, and we don't think that this burdens free speech. I mean, they also talked about the fact that this wasn't really a burden on free speech as much as it was a burden on a company owned by with foreign owners. I mean, they went a lot of different ways to get to the result that we knew they were going to come to in the first place.
Yeah. Well, so then I guess it's a question of legally what happens next, June, because the law is the law. The Supreme Court supports the law. But what is a law if it's not actually enforced? If no one decides to, say, fine companies like Apple and Google if they continue to support TikTok as a platform in the U.S., what happens?
Well, the problem is that even if Donald Trump can come in and tell his attorney general, Pam Bondi expected, don't enforce this. And by the way, Bondi did not respond when asked whether or not they would enforce the TikTok ban during her confirmation hearings. So he can do that. But the question is whether the platform, whether Apple and Oracle and Google will listen to that, will feel reassured by that, because the penalties here are so enormous. $5,000 per violation. Are they going to trust that the Trump administration is not going to come after them? And also, the statute of limitations is 5 years. So will the next administration come after them? You know, from the people I've spoke to don't think that Apple, Google, Oracle will take that chance.
All right, June Grosso, host of Bloomberg Law. Thank you so much. And we want to turn now to the host of Bloomberg Technology. Caroline Hyde is joining us from New York. So, Caroline, when we consider what TikTok's options here really are, if it wants to be able to continue to operate in the U.S. For a long time to come, if it has to be a divestment, who at this time are the likeliest potential buyers?
Well, we've spoken to one at length and an ongoing nature, who is Frank McCourt Jr., billionaire, teaming up with Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, and indeed a number of private equity or indeed family offices, is what he says. He said, legally speaking, he put an offer on the table before the date that was necessary, and he's waiting for an answer from ByteDance, the parent company. Then, of course, we have that extraordinary breaking news coming from our Bloomberg colleagues over in Asia, really articulating that China is itself thinking about who would be the best possible suitor. In their mind's eye, is it Elon Musk, of course, someone who understands social media extraordinarily well, understands the generative AI and AI data perspective on it, but ultimately also has strong relationships with China, the fact through Tesla, and indeed potentially that could be a way that they navigate future China-US relations. You, of course, both well aware of the geopolitics of all of this far better than I am, but ultimately we are still trying to find a suitor when ultimately ByteDance, the owner, and now Shou Chew, who's just taken to his own platform to discuss it, the CEO of TikTok, they don't want to sell. They don't want to see this as an ultimate endpoint. And Shou Chew just now has taken to TikTok, thanking Trump himself, talking about President Trump and thanking him for his commitment to finding a solution to keep the social media platform active in the United States. So will there be some sort of deal done on actual underlying data, or will it have to be a divestment as the law says it has to be? And then you kick forward that 90-day or 270-day reprieve.
Well, okay, so Caroline, with all of that said, we could talk about these potential suitors all day long, but China has to approve this, right? Doesn't Beijing have to sign off on this? And why would we think that it will?
Precisely. The reason that China has an input into the sale is because if any Chinese company is trying to sell its underlying algorithm, ultimately its IP, it gets a say. And certainly when it's as dominant a force as the likes of TikTok is. So that is why they would be able to navigate this. From China's perspective, I can see that then potentially seeing Elon Musk as someone who thus far has spoken warmly of China and managed to navigate the building of manufacturing in Shanghai. He would be a useful person to continue to be an ally with. Maybe they feel that is a bargaining chip of the future. But all of this is very much as we say, hearsay. All of this, I think, is what's so interesting when you go to some of the venture capitalists behind this. What's so politically integral for you as well is, well, yeah, Jeff Yass, who of course is over at Susquehanna. Susquehanna, along with the likes of General Atlantic, along with the likes of Sequoia, have large stakes in ByteDance. But there's also other VCs that I've spoken to who have hoovered it up on the secondary market. They don't believe that China is in any way going to allow TikTok to be sold in the United States. They'd love it if it did. They'd get some money back. But ultimately, they think, look, this is going to be China shutting down Apple in response. This, for them, is the consumer brand that resonated from China abroad and most broadly in the United States.
Yeah, great context. Boy, we got the best of Bloomberg on this story today. Caroline Hyde, what a treat. Thank you so much, Caroline. And June Grasso as well. As we explore more on the legal side of this story, Mary Rose Papandrea is with us, Samuel Ash Distinguished Professor of Constitutional Law at UNC. Mary Rose, it's great to see you today. Are you looking at this as a national security case, as the court clearly did, or a First Amendment case?
Oh, well, it's definitely a First Amendment case in my view, but I agree with your previous commentators that the court did let national security concerns outweigh those First Amendment concerns.
Well, so obviously we're very much focused on the implications here for TikTok specifically, Mary Rose, but do you see precedent potentially set here for other platforms who could face similar challenges in the future?
Yes, absolutely. There is the door open now that Congress decides that another company owned by a foreign outlet, a foreign company like Politico, for example, if they deem that a danger to national security based on its collection of data, that would seem to be supported by today's decision. So there's a potential danger, and we're just really left to the political process to provide protection to other outlets like Politico and others that are owned by foreign companies.
Huh. Interesting. So what's going to happen this weekend? Does TikTok just kind of skate through the weekend and wait for Donald Trump to do something on Monday? Or would it behoove TikTok to shut it down, take the weekend off, avoid fines, and wait for the next step?
Well, I think as June was explaining, the way the law works is it actually goes after the platforms, Apple and Google, that are sponsoring the app. So TikTok itself would not be shutting itself down, and I highly doubt that it would think of doing so. Apple and Google, I agree, are in a position of do they trust these assurances that Donald Trump, the president-elect, has been signaling that he would not go after them. One thing that did come up in oral argument, I think the justices felt some comfort in that it would take some time for the app to go dark. You know, the people still have the app on their phone. The app should still function there, at least in the short run, before there are needs for fixing bugs and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of time, certainly 24 hours, for Donald Trump to come into office. And so the big issue will be, is there any way, I think I would add to what we've already heard today, that I wonder if Donald Trump is talking to members of Congress to get a quick bill passed. That would would give a lot more assurance to these third parties like Apple and Google that they can continue to host TikTok on their platform without risking onerous fines. And I don't think that's unlikely, even though this bill received widespread bipartisan support. There seems to be a new tune coming out of Congress and some members of Congress. So particularly if the bill were written perhaps to give some time, a period of time where this could be worked out rather than ruling it off the table forever.
Well, we do know some lawmakers have suggested a 270-day extension. Essentially, we'll see if that is able to go anywhere. But your point is well taken, Mary Rose, on the change of heart we've seen here. But I think for a lot of lawmakers, when they initially signed off on this, they said, look, this is not actually an effort to ban TikTok or to infringe on anyone's First Amendment rights. It's just an effort to have it under different ownership. I know you were supportive of TikTok's argument, obviously, in this Supreme Court case. You signed onto the brief, but isn't there something to consider here where all of these First Amendment rights for the content creators could still be protected if TikTok just sold itself? Where exactly is the violation when there is another option that's not a ban?
Yes, I will say that the court was particularly dismissive of the rights of the content creators and those who use TikTok. It seemed somewhat concerned about laws that interfere with ownership. It decides, it says it would assume without deciding that a heightened level of scrutiny does apply to any law that interferes with the ownership. I think at the very least, we need to have some sort of heightened scrutiny because ownership is important. The owners do set the tone. They exercise editorial discretion, even if in the case of a social media platform, it's in the form of an algorithm. But that is a form of expression that the court itself recognized just last year. So I think this ownership is still a real First Amendment concern. The court is very tentative. Of course, this opinion came out in an expedited basis, so the court is hesitant to really come down one way or the other. But it is a real concern, and I think going forward, the court says this is just for today only, and for TikTok, I don't know what the court would do in the future if we see a divestment law that is so clearly infected with content-based concerns. The court here today felt like it could disentangle the content-based concerns about the propaganda coming perhaps from the TikTok algorithm with the concerns that the Chinese are getting important data from U.S. users through the TikTok app.
How much can Donald Trump do through executive order versus Congress going back in to turn over this law?
Yes, I think as we were discussing, the real issue here is these three of the third parties, Apple and Google, and whether they would feel comforted by an executive order that says we will not enforce this law. There is a 5-year statute of limitation, and even without worrying about the next administration after Donald Trump, it's worth noting Donald Trump himself has flip-flopped on TikTok. So I would not necessarily assume that Donald Trump will be so favorably disposed to TikTok throughout his presidency.
All right, Mary Rose Papandrea, Samuel Ash Distinguished Professor of Constitutional Law at UNC Chapel Hill. We really appreciate your insight today. Thank you so much for joining us here on Balance of Power. And Joe, when we consider these third parties, Apple and Google, the CEOs of both of those companies are expected to attend Trump's inauguration.
Yes.
On Monday.
Along with a
I
guy
don't know
named
if the change of indoor versus outdoor swearing in will actually change attendance at all, but I wonder if this could be a
That's a great question, because they were supposed to be on the platform.
Yes.
Cho Chu is going to be down below in the audience, right? So he may not be in the rotunda, and Tim Cook will be, which is a fascinating set of optics to consider as well. Maybe they'll put them all on stage at the Capital One Arena.
Yeah.
Is that how this ends?
I don't know.
With an EO to come?
We have a lot of questions about what's going to happen on
That's
Monday.
why we do this live on Monday. Yes, absolutely. You'll be with us, right? 11 a.m. is the start of special coverage on Monday, the inauguration of President Donald Trump. If you're just joining us, they've moved it indoors. It's going to be too cold outside. We'll have more with our panel next on Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the S&P trading at the best level of the day right now. In fact, it is set for its best week since the election. Right to the numbers, S&P up 76, now at 6,014. A gain of 1.3%. The Dow up 445, up now by 1%. NASDAQ Composite Index up 368 for NASDAQ, a gain right now of 1.9%. 10-year 4.59% with a 2-year 4.25%. Spot gold trading lower, down 1/10 of 1%, down $4 the ounce. Little change, 27.10 right now. West Texas Intermediate crude 78.25 a barrel, down 0.5 of 1%. Bitcoin though surging 4.5%. Bitcoin now at 104,686. Goldman Sachs has handed its top two executives, David Solomon and John Waldron, retention awards valued at $80 million each. Goldman Sachs shares, they are gaining by 1.8%. Again, recapping here, stocks higher. S&P right now up by 1.3%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. And Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. On the Friday edition of Balance of Power, we've always got our eyes on the markets, thanks to Charlie at World Headquarters in New York. This is the fastest show in politics with a lot to cover today. Things have been moving pretty fast today. The Friday before Donald Trump's swearing in, the final Friday of Joe Biden's administration. And Kaylee, boy, we've got a lot happening this weekend. The city is just in lockdown. It's Fortress Washington. You kind of can't even drive into town now as it is, and it's going to keep increasing with the security, the Jersey barriers, the fencing, and the whole bit over the weekend. Donald Trump's going to have a victory rally Sunday night at Capital One Arena. The interesting thing is he's going back the next day.
Yeah, at least according to his post on Truth Social, people who would have been on the National Mall, I guess, to attend the inauguration in person or at least view it from the mall can now view it inside the Capital One Arena. And then Donald Trump, after he is sworn in, intends to parade to Capital One and join supporters there for, I guess, what will be a two-night
That's right.
event.
Exactly. This is our way of telling you the inauguration has been moved indoors. It's going to be 9 degrees in town on Monday, and just like we saw Ronald Reagan do, well, a little bit differently, because they went to the White House for that. They're going to move the ceremony into the Capitol Rotunda.
Yep.
And good luck getting a seat. How do they fit that many egos in one room?
Well, that's an excellent question. We have a lot of questions, actually, about how logistically this is going to work, but this would be only the third time in history an inauguration doesn't happen outdoors. So on that note, let's assemble our political panel with their vast knowledge of American political history. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, both of them Bloomberg Politics contributors. So Rick, it was raised by some reporters over at Politico, this notion that this is Donald Trump's second inauguration, and whether or not this would actually be moved indoors if it was his first, because you miss out on a lot of the pomp and circumstance.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a lot of second guessing. There'll be pomp and circumstance. I mean, there'll be a nice ceremony that'll get broadcast live on television and social media. Him surrounded by his, incoming cabinet and Congress. So there'll be a nice element of what we love about America, which is our institutions and our formalities of them. But this is really Donald Trump. I mean, he's not the kind of guy who wants to, sort of freeze as he's giving a speech, which could last quite some time, right? I mean, it wouldn't be surprised that his inaugural address would go over an hour. And the replacement is classic Donald Trump. One more big rally, right back to back with another one the day before. And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, that this isn't a trend in his presidency where, once a month, once a quarter, there's a big rally somewhere. He's not running for anything, but he loves his rallies.
We should let everyone know that Rick Davis was on Ronald Reagan's inaugural committee the last time this had to happen, so Rick knows what he's talking about. Jeannie, it was 10 degrees when Barack Obama was sworn into office, and I was out there shivering in the shade with a lot of people underneath the dome. It was many hours of freezing. George W. Bush had freezing rain at his first inauguration. What do you make of this call?
Well, I think it shows that Republicans don't like to be cold, and Democrats, tough as we are, we're willing to do it. Be out there and cold. But can I just say, don't you guys? No, I don't. Don't you guys think it's sort of fitting? All of us started out this election cycle in Iowa, and it was like 40 degrees below or something. And now coming to a painful end on Monday, 9 degrees. So in some ways, it's sort of the encapsulation of what this entire election season has been like. Old, frigid, cold.
At least in Iowa, we all got to be inside the studio. We weren't really going outside that much.
Which was also really
Which was
cold,
freezing.
but
Yeah, it was all relative.
Absolutely different.
Then I wasn't warm for like 5 days straight at any point. I don't think. We just had a red headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal. I do want to mention as we look ahead to the inauguration, knowing that it won't just be Donald Trump who is getting sworn in as president, but current Ohio Senator J.D. Vance will be sworn in as vice president, leaving open a vacancy for a Senate seat in Ohio. And we just got news from Ohio's governor, Governor DeWine, announcing he will fill Vance's Ohio Senate seat with John Husted, who is currently the lieutenant governor of Ohio. So this is confirmation of that after there had been some rumblings in recent days, Joe, about this seat potentially going to Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, isn't that something? There's also been talk of him wanting to run for governor.
Yes, the Washington Post is reporting
maybe
that today.
something that he is really going to consider. This follows Ron DeSantis' pick of Ashley Moody to fill Florida's vacancy. So we're getting a better sense of the makeup here.
Yeah, I guess the question is, knowing these were going to be Republican seats regardless, how much the individuals selected really matter when they're heading into a Senate that has a fairly comfortable Republican majority.
Rick Davis, you spent enough time in the Senate to have a feeling on this. What do you make of these two decisions?
Yeah, these both really follow historical norms. It's not unusual for when you have a vacancy, especially in the Senate, for sort of the senior ranking party official who's replacing someone to be put into that seat, whether it's an attorney general or lieutenant governor. So that is actually the mainstream. We heard rumors that Laura Trump maybe becomes senator from Florida. That would have really broken the norms. And of course, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's never held public office, would be another great example of breaking that norm in Ohio. So what we're really seeing at the start of the Trump administration is a lot of normal, which I don't think anybody would have actually bet on. And so I do think that it's an interesting indication of what's going on in really two key Republican states like Florida and Ohio, that it's sort of business as usual. And by the way, these two governors, not big Trump supporters. Mike DeWine, not a Trump guy at all. DeSantis ran against him. They picked the people they thought would best represent the state in the United States Senate in those each respective states.
Well, and I guess that person for Governor DeWine this time did not seem to be Vivek Ramaswamy. But as I mentioned, Jeannie, the Washington Post is reporting that Ramaswamy is gearing up for a governor's bid in 2026. An Ohio operative, they cite, saying that Vivek's base plan is the same: to get accomplishments at DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, he's co-leading with Elon Musk, and then announce a run for governor shortly. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I never thought that he would want to fill this seat at this time. I think he wants to get his bona fides working, as you mentioned, in DOGE, and then make a run for the top seat in his home state or in his state. So, I think it's a plan that actually does make sense. Now, obviously, a lot can happen in a short period of time. So it's certainly not a guaranteed thing, but I think he does have a viable path forward, and he certainly has the support and funding to get there if he really wants to. So I do think it's a plan that makes more sense than sticking him in the Senate.
We've got a breaking story on the terminal, Kaylee, that we should mention because it, of course, plays into the transition that we're talking about here. The Federal Reserve announcing today it's withdrawing from the network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system. This is a coalition of banks. This goes back to 2017 in studying climate risk. Is the transformation complete, Rick?
Yeah, we can see the anticipation of the Trump administration, highly critical on the outside of mission creep at the Fed, especially as it relates to climate rules. And I think this is just a declaration of the obvious to come, right? And so rather than make it an issue for the Trump folks, they're just sort of cleaning the deck for the new administration. Look, the good news about Donald Trump is we've already seen one term of him, and we've had him around for 8 years pontificating on every issue that we could ever imagine. And so it's not a hard guess where he's going to wind up. Now, he's a flip-flopper, loves to change his mind. TikTok's a good example. We're not sure where all that's going to come down, so it always adds an element of surprise. But we know what we're getting into, and so do these regulators. And it's not a surprise to me that they would immediately start to process a new approach.
Well, and it's not just the regulators. We should point out that the banks are pulling out of net zero alliances as well. The Net Zero Banking Alliance, specifically just within the last month, has lost Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan Chase, basically all the big ones. BlackRock pulled out of an equivalent net zero asset managers alliance. This is, I guess you could say, Jeannie, big business adjusting to the landscape under Donald Trump. And the same could be said for other companies as well. Look at what Meta is doing, changing personnel and pulling back on fact checking.
That's absolutely right. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to read the tea leaves of what happened in November. They see a total shift in Washington, D.C. in terms of the power base, but they also, and I think importantly, also see a shift with the American public. And so we do see from, as you mentioned, from tech to the financial circles and elsewhere, an adjustment to that. It is particularly worth noting, though, these changes as it pertains to issues involving climate and green are happening at the same time that California is suffering from these tremendous wildfires. So, climate change remains an existential crisis, and we do depend on our leadership to move us forward on that. And that is a concern to a lot of people.
Well, things are winding down here. Our remaining moment, Rick Davis, your thoughts on Joe Biden's final words. He's going to be delivering his final speech, likely publicly, at least of his presidency, a real formal speech here this hour. How will Americans remember him as we swear in Donald Trump on Monday?
Yeah, I think everybody's going to at least initially see Joe Biden in a prism of age, right? He was the first real president to be forced out because of his age. And I must say, he's turning it over to what will be the oldest person ever sworn in to the presidency in history. And he beats Joe Biden by 5 months, Donald Trump. And so we are in an era where age has become a thing with elected officials, whether it's in the Senate, the House, or the presidency. And so I think that will still be an issue that he'll have to deal with.
They'll be back with us on the late edition of Balance of Power. That's at 5 p.m. Washington time. Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Stay with us. A lot more to follow here on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Federal Reserve says it is withdrawing from the network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system. That is a global coalition of central banks engaged in the study of climate risk that was launched in 2017. U.S. stocks higher across the board, very close to session highs right now on the S&P, up 74 at 6,011. A gain right now of 1.2%. S&P on the week up by 3.1%. Believe it or not, this is the first full week of trading of the new year. The Dow up 425, up by 1%. We've got NASDAQ up 349, up now by 1.8%. NASDAQ 100 index, full of big tech names, doing a little bit better, up 1.9%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, up now by 0.5%. 10-year 4.60%, with the 2-year currently at 4.26%. Gold down $6 the ounce, down 0.2%, 27.07 on the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude is down 0.5%, 78.30 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin now up 4.6%, 104,750 on Bitcoin. As you have been hearing right here on Balance of Power, the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld a law that threatens to shut down the widely popular TikTok social media platform in the U.S. as soon as Sunday. Among U.S.-based social media stocks, Meta Platforms up 0.7%, Snap Inc. trading lower now, Snap down by 2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington once again. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much with the latest on financial markets, including the market reaction to today's Supreme Court decision upholding the law that would see TikTok banned, if not divested, by Sunday. And interestingly, come Monday, TikTok CEO Shou Chew will be here in Washington. He's planning to attend Donald Trump's inauguration, which has raised some eyebrows. And you know what raised eyebrows as well, Joe, was the invitation Donald Trump extended to another Chinese individual. The Chinese president, in fact, Xi Jinping, was invited to the inauguration, though we learned today he is not coming. He is, though, sending in his stead China's Vice President Han Zheng.
Optics are everything. He still, though, got on the horn with President Xi.
Yes.
You know, we're not waiting until the swearing in. Donald Trump's been in touch with any number of world leaders, some of whom have gone to Mar-a-Lago. And as we hear now from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, the phone was ringing, and the call's coming from Beijing. Tyler, what do we know?
Yeah, Joe. So President-elect Trump confirming this call in a post on Truth Social, saying that it was, quote, very good, but also saying that they spoke about a range of issues, including balancing trade, fentanyl, which we know was a campaign issue for him on the campaign trail, but also about TikTok. Now, their call came before the Supreme Court brought down their decision today, but also on the heels of, as Kaylee mentioned, just learning that the TikTok CEO, Shou Chew, will be at the inauguration on Monday. And I was on Capitol Hill yesterday. I had a chance to catch up with Senator Mark Warner. He's a Democrat, of course, the ranking member on Senate Intel, but he was the chair of the committee when the TikTok bill originally passed, and of course has been on Balance of Power numerous times about that. And I asked him about the TikTok CEO coming to the inauguration, and he said that he was confused by this. I want you to take a listen to what he told reporters here.
I don't get it. 80% of the Congress, Democrats and Republicans, agreed that TikTok is a huge national security concern. I can't think of a potentially more powerful propaganda tool. And the irony in all this was Donald Trump was the first guy to point out this problem. Matter of fact, his administration had to convince me. They did a great job of convincing me and the overwhelming members of Congress.
He goes on to say that he would actually support delaying the ban if that's what it would take to get a deal over the finish line. But he said that he doesn't understand how this squares with the incoming Trump administration's rhetoric when it comes to getting tough on China. Of course, Joe and Kaylee, President-elect Trump wouldn't take that side of this. He's been saying all along that he is the only one that could potentially bring a negotiation to the table.
Well, but it's not only up to Donald Trump ultimately to make a deal happen. China is going to have to sign off on any divestment, giving the the algorithm in play here, right?
Right, and that's also why it's so interesting to watch all of these influences and factors coming into Inauguration Day, since we know that Elon Musk will be there at the inauguration. Bloomberg News reporting that Chinese officials were looking at him as potentially being part of some sort of acquisition. But then I'm also watching these other big tech CEOs. Mark Zuckerberg's going to be there. We've been talking all along about how a potential ban on TikTok, right, could impact Meta, for instance, as creators and those seeking out content might look for other platforms if this ban goes into effect.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Great reporting. Thank you so much. And Joe, when we consider this prospect of a deal happening, if it's to be someone like Elon Musk, who also owns X, or another tech company, just earlier this week, we had the outgoing chair of the FTC, Lena Khan, in studio here with us and asked her who realistically would be able to get around antitrust concerns by absorbing an app or a platform with 170 million users in the U.S. without raising a flag. And while she kind of danced around that a little bit, she did say, you know, traditionally, when you look at tech companies and like absorbing a company of that size, that it might draw some scrutiny.
I would think, although we heard from Chuck Schumer on this just yesterday, his statement appealing to the hundreds of thousands of influencers. He actually mentioned on the floor who make a living here. Democrats have apparently come on over, with maybe the exception of Senator Warren.
Yeah, it's interesting how the winds change the closer we get to Donald Trump's inauguration, knowing Donald Trump has different feelings about TikTok than he once did. And the winds have changed in the lead up to the inauguration in other areas as well, knowing that Donald Trump issued threats, for example, if Israeli hostages weren't returned by Monday, when he takes the oath of office, that there would be consequences. And lo and behold, this week, we did finally, after months of effort, see a breakthrough on a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Today, after what had been a little bit of a holdup in the Israeli Knesset, they have now actually voted to advance that deal, and hostages could begin returning home on Sunday.
Yeah, this broke right on this program a couple of days ago. As soon as Joe Biden was in front of the podium talking about it, Benjamin Netanyahu said they were still reviewing details. It sounded like maybe things were going to be slow-walked, maybe even to coincide with the inaugural on Monday. As Kaylee mentioned, Donald Trump promising all hell to break loose in the Middle East if the hostages were not released, or at least a deal to have their release. But the Knesset has signed off on this, Kaylee, and this is going to happen.
So we want to get more on the fact that this is happening and turn now to one of our trusted voices here on Balance of Power. Carmel Arbit is back with us. She is Atlantic Council Senior Fellow for the Middle East Programs at the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Carmel. I guess when we consider the timing here, the slight delay on the behalf of the Israeli government, was that mostly just because of domestic political pressure, or was there really a chance this wasn't actually going to be agreed to?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember as these agreements are unfolding, and of course we've been watching for 15 months as we've approached ceasefire agreements. You know, one went into play, others have fallen apart, just how fragile these deals are. But very much Israeli politics came into play as Netanyahu was looking at what he would have to do to hold his coalition together if he did move forward with the ceasefire agreement. And he ultimately made a decision that if he had to choose between pressure from incoming President Donald Trump or pressure from his far-right flank, he was going to yield to that pressure from President Trump and really set a tone for what their relationship is going to look like once Trump returns to office.
When we consider phase one here, Carmel, in this 6-week period of time, the 6-week truce, the deal calls for an extension, essentially, of the temporary ceasefire if a full and permanent truce is not agreed on at that point. How long could that keep rolling? Do you suspect this will be figured out in that 6-week time to have a permanent solution?
Yeah. For the U.S. right now is very committed to bringing an end to this conflict, for this ceasefire to be exactly as you say, permanent. So of course it's being structured in 3 phases. Each phase will, whether or not the ceasefire is able to be made permanent, will depend on both Hamas and Israel meeting their obligations under each phase. In Israel, and frankly also for Hamas, the politics of this are very difficult. Part of the reason it was so difficult for Netanyahu to say yes is that, of course, he had promised to completely eliminate Hamas, not just eliminate Hamas from power, not just deplete Hamas's military, but eliminate them altogether, and that hasn't happened. And so one of the key concerns for Israelis, especially on the right, is that Hamas could return to power. And for others, it's this concerned that there is no clear path forward for governance in the Gaza Strip. And so it's very hard to see how this becomes permanent, or when it does, what that actually looks like.
Well, and Carmel, I'm glad you raised this notion that Israel had said from the get-go its objective here was the elimination of Hamas, because just earlier this week when he was speaking at the Atlantic Council, outgoing Secretary of State Antony Blinken had this to say about what he described as potentially perpetual war. Let's listen.
Each time Israel completes its military operations and pulls back, Hamas militants regroup and reemerge because there's nothing else to fill the void. Indeed, we assess that Hamas has recruited almost as many new militants as it has lost. That is a recipe for an enduring insurgency and perpetual war.
So, Carmel, what realistically could fill the void to prevent an enduring insurgency?
Yeah, this is really the question of the hour as we move into, again, as we said, a ceasefire and then what will hopefully be an end to this conflict. The Palestinian Authority continues to reassert that it is ready, able, and willing to take this on. The Israeli government is opposed to that, but hasn't put forward an alternative. The far right in Israel would like to see Israel maintain a presence in the Gaza Strip, both militarily and through settlements. But Netanyahu has also said that he's not willing to do that. And so what you have is the potential for a power vacuum that could lead to chaos and, again, the reemergence of Hamas, or frankly other more extremist groups within the Gaza Strip.
There have been a lot of comparisons to Ronald Reagan and the release of the Iranian hostages coinciding with the inaugural. What are these optics going to look like when the first hostages are released?
First of all, I think it's important to just note, the hostage agreement that was reached, as Biden has said repeatedly, was the agreement that the Biden administration put forward in May. What has changed is, of course, the politics, the dynamics on the ground. Israel's feeling that it has at least cleared out or retained some control over land that it can kind of address some of these issues. This has really been a triumph, I would say, of bipartisanship. We saw the Biden administration lay the groundwork, do the work that was necessary to make this possible, and then work in close partnership with the Trump administration to bring it over the edge. So I think that the Trump administration, of course, is going to be declaring victory. This is a great note for them to be coming into Washington this coming weekend, but at the same time really shows what continuity and cooperation can yield.
Well, and when we consider the Trump administration and what they will now be dealing with in the Middle East as a result of this breakthrough and what caused the breakthrough, Carmel, how much easier of a time potentially will they have navigating the relationship with Iran, which through its proxies has been itself weakened?
Yeah, that's certainly part of the conditions that have made this agreement possible in this moment is the weakening of both Iran and its proxies. So the Trump administration will benefit from that. Their ambitions, of course, are still set on a larger regional agreement that includes the Saudis, and they're going to work to pursue that and are well positioned to do so, I would note. That doesn't mean this will not be without its challenges. Of course, as we talked about, making sure that each stage is actually reached. Israel released today the first list of Palestinian prisoners that it's going to allow to be released as part of the exchange with hostages, whether or not Hamas actually produces all of the hostages, how many are alive, and so forth. The details here are going to still be tricky for this administration, and I would expect there will still be friction points between Trump and Netanyahu and Trump and regional partners, so it will not be smooth sailing from here.
Do we actually have a sense, though, more specifically, Carmel, what this exchange is going to look like? Are we going to see a meeting at a crossing with Gaza? Are they going to be on an airport tarmac? How's this going to roll?
Yeah, so Israel spent today setting up essentially centers in 3 different border points to receive the hostages. So I would expect optics very similar from the Israeli side of the ceasefire agreement that was first reached, where you see, kind of trucks going in, picking up the hostages, reunions with families, and so forth. In the past, they haven't allowed the release of Palestinian prisoners to be filmed, and they will, of course, be distributed to different places. Some will go back to Gaza, others to the West Bank, and then there is talk of those who may be deported. So I don't expect the TV optics to be quite as kind of grand around that, but you will see receptions back into communities, families being reunited on both sides. I would expect it's going to be very, very emotional.
Really interesting. That's the real stuff from Carmel Arbit. Carmel, thank you so much, as always. Atlantic Council Senior Fellow for Middle East Programs, Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative. We always learn something when we talk to Carmel. We've got some big days coming up here in political history. It's not just the inaugural, it's the release of hostages overseas.
Yeah, which could happen just before the inaugural on Sunday. Sunday also being the TikTok deadline, which we've had development on today after the Supreme Court decision. It's a lot to cover here in Washington, and it's only just beginning as the new administration comes in. So we'll have to come back with more at 5.
I think we'll have a lot to talk about. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzana will be with us. Hope you will be too. 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors that bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week for this Friday, January 17th. We've got smiles on the team in the control room.
Everyone's happy.
Yeah.
Is it because it's Friday or is it because of this rally?
if you're a bull in this market, where it seems like a lot of folks are, yeah, you're pretty happy. I mean, we're on track for our best week since the November U.S. presidential election, and that's kind of interesting and timely since we've got Donald Trump being sworn in as the 47th president on Monday. We're going to talk a lot more about the inauguration coming your way.
Also on the trade, so far this week, the S&P 500 up more than 3%. Charlie Pellet's going to give us some details on exactly what is going on. Meantime, Carol, did you hear about TikTok?
Yeah, I was kind of glued to my phone, earbuds in. Yeah, it's banned in the United States. But is that it? I have so many questions for our Caroline Hyde, who's going to join us in just a moment. Hey, and on that, whether it's TikTok, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's domestic policies, and so much more, a new political day in the United States starts on Monday. We're going to tackle what to expect, who will be there, who won't be there, and some of the issues. What could come down in that first day of a Trump second-term White House.
Also, all eyes on the Middle East as the U.S. does undergo this presidential transition, and also as a ceasefire continues in the works, that Mideast peace truce, the LA fires as well, the rebuild. Also, Aon CFO is going to be joining us on the insurance story. So we got a big show coming up, Carol.
Yeah, we're also going to get into the DIYers getting in on the EV charging game. Yep, it's happening, folks. All right, let's get a check on that trade on this Friday. Let's turn things over to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Friday. We are very close to session highs right now with the S&P up 1.2%, rallying 69 points now at 6,006. Dow Industrials higher by 0.9%, up 405 on the Dow. NASDAQ up 329. That is a gain of 1.7%. 10-year 4.60% with a 2-year 4.26%. Gold down $8 the ounce, 27.05 on the precious metal, down 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.6%, 78.18 a barrel. And Bitcoin, major story there, surging 4.7% at 104,860 now on Bitcoin. The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld a law that threatens to shut down the widely popular TikTok social media platform in the U.S. as soon as Sunday, ruling that free speech rights must yield to concerns that Chinese control of the app creates a national security risk among U.S.-based social media companies. Meta Platforms up 0.6%. Snap Inc. right now down by 1.8%. So again, recapping the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all higher, and if it's not too early in the year to start quoting year-to-date numbers, it is. I know we got the S&P right now up by 2.1% year-to-date. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Actually, no, Bloomberg Business Week continues right here on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
We're talking a lot of politics, so Balance of Power kind of continuing on this Friday. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. And speaking of that, we do start in Washington. The Supreme Court unanimously upholding a law that threatens to shut down the wildly popular TikTok social media platform in the United States. That could happen as soon as Sunday. That ruling that free speech rights must yield to concerns that Chinese control of the app creating a national security risk. High Court saying earlier today Congress well-supported concerns about the Chinese data collection justified a law that singled out TikTok. The measure requires ByteDance to sell the American version of the video sharing app by January 19th or, Tim, face a ban.
The decision opens an uncertain chapter for TikTok and its 170 million U.S. users, and it puts President-elect Donald Trump at the center of it all. With more on this highly anticipated and expected decision, with us is Bloomberg Technology co-host Caroline Hyde here in New York. Caroline, does this mean it actually could be the end for TikTok if President Trump doesn't jump in at the last minute to save it?
Precisely. This is about executive orders. This is about whether or not Trump does indeed become the person that now holds the ball in the court. Look, we were anticipating this from the Supreme Court, as we had just said. We anticipated that they'd say national security trumps here, but there are still many roles in place. What will Trump do? Look, we've already heard from Shou-Chew, the CEO of TikTok, who, by the way, is going to be at the inauguration, and he's saying, thank you, Trump. Thank you for saying that you are going to step in. The question is, does an executive order trump a congressional law that Oracle, that Apple, that Google have to stand by about allowing the app to be available on the app stores, but also the infrastructure that supplies it to us? Remember, Oracle is the one that chooses whether to host it. Will it go dark on Sunday, or will we therefore just not be able to roll the videos as we're used to? Or could TikTok itself say, sorry, we're putting up a little post-it note that you can't activate us on Sunday, really antagonizing those 170 million users?
You know, there's so much going on around this still, I feel like, Caroline. President-elect Donald Trump, of course, president come Monday, says he discussed TikTok with President Xi of China. You do wonder what are some of the conversations. I mean, this is why, like in our teas, we're like, Supreme Court banned TikTok in the United States, but is that the end? I do feel like, are there still some possible doors that are open for TikTok in the U.S.?
So right. Because it could be bought. Remember, all of this is dependent on a ban or a divestiture. So could we have Frank McCourt Jr., who we were talking about last week, coming and riding to the rescue, being able to buy the overall TikTok, but not its underlying algorithm? He's got a bid on the table. Also, there's China, the government itself, potentially thinking Elon Musk might be a rather nice holder of the asset, if indeed they were forced to be selling. It would be a good chip on the bargaining table with Trump going forward, but that takes the decision-making entirely out of ByteDance's and TikTok hands. Also, we've got to take into place who are the investors in ByteDance. Some of them are American. We're thinking General Atlantic. You're thinking Susquehanna with Jeffrey Yass, who happens to be a big political donor to Trump here. You're also hearing of plenty other VCs who told me privately that they don't think that China is going to allow this to happen without taking some serious action on, say, like an Apple. This is the pinup. This is finally a consumer company going big in the United States. They're not just going to roll over. This is either going to be a key bargaining chip for the Chinese government, or indeed you'll see that ByteDance will decide to divest of it. There are so many moving parts here. But for me, as a user of the app, I just want to know on Sunday whether I'm going to be able to log in or not.
Totally here. Hey, by the way, Frank McCourt, I know who you guys have talked to in regards to he being part of a group that is interested in TikTok. We have too. He's going to actually be on our air in the 3 o'clock hour, so he'll be on Bloomberg. So looking forward to see what he has to say at this point.
Caroline, you mentioned Elon Musk potentially as one of the suitors here. That also brings up the idea that the president-elect has changed his mind quite a bit over the last few years on his view when it comes to TikTok. How do you explain this change of heart?
That it helped him win an election from his perspective. A warm place in his heart is how he calls it for TikTok. But also, as I mentioned, some key donors who happen to be investors in ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, maybe whispering a few things in his ear. But I actually want to call that out because, Tim, I think it's such a good point. This is a total 180 for an awful lot of lawmakers, either side of the aisle. We just had Chuck Schumer, of course, minority leader of the Senate, saying he really wants to see a U.S. buyer of TikTok. He's actually, according to the New York Times, said to Biden, this is about your legacy if you allow this to go dark on Sunday. This was bipartisan in nature, and all of a sudden, the game of chicken becomes very real. TikTok says it might just go black, and everyone's suddenly incredibly worried.
Hey, Caroline, for someone who knows the ins and outs of the broader technology landscape globally, you know, this ruling, and depending on how it plays out, what does it mean for global technology, where we've been in an environment in a lot of ways we can kind of easily access? And I just wonder what this could mean down the road.
Well, if we cast our mind back to 2020, India did this. This isn't the first time TikTok's been banned. India ousted TikTok, ByteDance, and also had plenty of other Chinese-owned apps. And they did it, and they flipped a switch, and it went dark on the day that it was banned. So this is the first time we've seen a big global player ban a Chinese company. But I do think more broadly, this is going to have a lot of intense relationships on what it means for Tim Cook and Apple and the progress that we make there. Of course, Elon Musk with Tesla in China, NVIDIA as it continues to want to sell worldwide. This is a question of US and China, but it's also, as you say, a question of social media ultimately being global. Also, the other thing to keep in play here is the US accounts for about 12% of TikTok's overall revenue, advertising revenue. It's much bigger in Indonesia in terms of size of population using it. It's actually making more revenue perhaps in other parts of the world. Maybe it can afford, as one VC said to me, to just say, thanks but no thanks, we'll make up for that in growth. We'll see you. And let this be an almighty cataclysmic game of geopolitics here on out.
That's a pretty intriguing idea, and I think would surprise many Americans who are used to sort of being the big player in the room when it comes to having leverage here. And I think that's pretty intriguing, Caroline. You mentioned other companies in relation to this. You mentioned Apple, you mentioned NVIDIA, what happens there with Chinese relations. What about what happens with companies that are competitors to TikTok, like a Meta Platforms, for example, with Instagram Reels? You know, the stock reaction today, not so clear. It was down earlier, now it's higher. Was this priced in?
It feels as though everyone thought the SCOTUS Supreme Court would go this particular direction. I was surprised that Snap was actually lower on the day, but this has got to be disastrous news for one Mark Zuckerberg. He must have been really thrilled at the idea that most of the revenue from advertising would be flowing into Instagram Reels, a key competitor. It wouldn't have been bad news for YouTube, the ultimate owner being Alphabet, and indeed Snap. So it does mean that the competitive landscape remains fierce. Also, what I think perhaps has shocked them, Tim and Carol, is the fact that people flew to Chinese-owned apps. They didn't just suddenly pour over into Instagram. A lot of them already probably have Instagram. But they're also going on to RedNote, as it's known, another Chinese-owned app. We've seen, of course, Lemonade being one of the most downloaded. That's also owned by ByteDance. But also, there's an interesting Texan-based company that's done relatively well, Clapper. We just had the chief of operations on as well. And they've seen a real uptick in users.
All right, great stuff as always. Have a great weekend. Bloomberg Technology co-host Caroline Hyde joining us here in New York City. Well, TikTok, as we mentioned, the executive CEO at Monday's inauguration of Donald Trump, along with many other high-profile individuals well known to the Bloomberg audience. He will be sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. That is Donald Trump, of course. His second term as leader of the world's biggest economy. And a lot could happen on his first day back at Pennsylvania Avenue. With some thoughts on that and what to expect, Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Kaylee Lines joining us in our warm and cozy Washington, D.C. bureau. I say warm and cozy because we already know, Kaylee, it's probably going to look at least a bit different.
Yeah, because it's going to be very cold. It's going to be cold all across the country, but D.C. is not immune to the Arctic blast that is coming and going to bring temperatures to the low single digits on Monday. And that's just the actual temperature. The real feel could be much lower. And for that reason, the president-elect announced today that he will be taking the oath of office to become the 47th president of the United States, not outside the Capitol, as is tradition, with an audience viewing on the Mall, but instead inside the rotunda. So all of the pomp and circumstance will move indoors instead of people lining up on the National Mall. Capital One Arena, where he's holding a pre-inauguration rally on Sunday, will also be open on Monday for spectators. And Donald Trump says he'll parade from his swearing in to Capital One and join supporters there after the proceedings at the Capitol. So this is going to look very different. We've only seen 3 times in history an inauguration moved indoors. The last time this happened was in 1985 when Ronald Reagan was sworn in. So it is going to make things a little bit different, but of course it's not going to stop Donald Trump from becoming the next president.
Kaylee, we do know that this is a guy who absolutely cares about optics. He likes the way things look. I remember Sean Spicer back in 2017 talking about crowd size at that first inauguration. What does all this mean for that sort of thing?
Well, they are not going to be able to fit that many people in a Capitol rotunda. In fact, if you go back and look at the presidential archives of Reagan's inauguration in 1985, that room itself looks like a can of sardines. I mean, or a Where's Waldo picture. It is incredibly packed in there. They're only going to be able to fit so many people, and those people, by and large, will be those most senior who would have joined him on the platform if this were traditionally the outdoor held ceremony. So his cabinet nominees, of course, Vice President J.D. Vance, the other presidents who will be in attendance for the inauguration, as well as the CEOs, one of which you just mentioned, Carol, TikTok CEO Shou Chew, but also Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook from Apple, Jeff Bezos. They are all expected to be in attendance as well.
You know what's interesting, though? President Xi of China will not be there, and Donald Trump came out talking on, I believe, on Truth Social earlier about a conversation with him and talking about some different issues. I am wondering kind of what he laid out there. I think he said he talked about balancing trade, fentanyl, TikTok, some other subjects, maybe how this kind of sets the tone for what the U.S.-China relationship might be under his second term.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Carol. It had raised eyebrows here in Washington that Xi Jinping was invited to the inauguration in the first place. He will not be coming. China's Vice President Han Zheng will be here instead. But clearly, the lack of attendance is not enough to stop Donald Trump from actually interacting with Xi Jinping ahead of taking the oath of office. He did say that fentanyl and trade were on the agenda on this call, mentioned TikTok as well, keeping in mind, as you were just discussing with Caroline, the Chinese government is going to have a role to play if some kind of deal is to be negotiated by Trump. But it also comes as we know that Donald Trump has promised potentially sweeping tariffs on all Chinese goods coming into the U.S. So Trump may be looking here for points of leverage to exercise things that he wants to get out of China. And this might just be the beginning of what could be ongoing conversations and negotiations. And it really initiates the idea that this could be happening starting on day one, and that it doesn't just go from tariffs and China policy on day one, but other policies as well, as we expect he could be addressing issues like immigration almost immediately after taking the oath.
So let's talk a little bit about that, Kaylee, because if I go back to my reference point being January 20th, 2017, a flurry of executive orders coming out just hours after he was inaugurated. And we saw that continue in the early days of the presidency as well. What should we be looking out for? What should we be watching? I assume immigration executive orders certainly at the top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bloomberg has had, through our wonderful colleagues here, some reporting on what exactly those executive orders could entail when it comes to certain deportations and tightening up restrictions at the border. So those could be among the very first things that Donald Trump tries to do as he begins this second term. But we could see other actions as well. He has promised repeatedly and stood by the statement that he does intend to pardon defendants from the January 6th attack on the Capitol back in 2021. How sweeping those pardons could be, who exactly is going to get it, if it will be all offenders, just nonviolent ones. It's unclear what those decisions actually will be, but he had said he could do that on the very first day in office. Something else we could see, not just unique to the president, but movement on his cabinet, as the Senate could vote to confirm some of the first cabinet secretaries to actually be able to be active in this administration on day one. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who, of course, is the Secretary of State designate, is seen as the most likely to be essentially confirmed and sworn in to that role immediately.
You know, Kaylee, I keep thinking about, we have so many conversations, you guys do too, you and Joe Matthew on Balance of Power, of just how many questions there are about what we heard on the campaign trail versus what actually gets put into action. And as you said, on his first day in office, there's a lot he can do as president alone, but then he also has to work with Congress. We know about the majority and slim majority that the Republicans have, but I mean, what is the posture that Donald Trump will face as president with the Democrats in Congress?
Yeah, this is the difficulty, Carol, because campaigning is one thing, governing is something else, and governing within the existing branches of government. The United States system suggests that Donald Trump can only do so much on his own. He is going to need congressional buy-in to some of his biggest ticket items that he wants to address, most specifically when it comes to tax policy. And there is a great deal of debate here in Washington as to how and when that gets done. The House preference through Speaker Mike Johnson, who has the support of Donald Trump, is to do one big reconciliation bill, budget reconciliation, a process that would essentially combine a whole host of things from the border and energy to the tax reform itself into one big package that just needs to pass with a majority in both chambers. The Senate would rather split things up, try to get a win early, save taxes for later, because it's going to take some time to put together. But that's the reality. Donald Trump is only going to be able to do so much in his first 100 days.
You know what everybody wants to know, Kaylee? Is it going to be a Trump Bible that he is sworn in on?
Oh, good question. We'll have to inquire. I'll get back to you.
Okay, deal. Some more reporting to be done. Kelly Lyons, thank you so much. She is one of the co-hosts of Balance of Power, a must listen to on all things going in and around the Washington. Kelly and Joe will be hosting along with us on Monday. We're going to do all the coverage of the inauguration.
You were asking the question, Kaylee didn't have time to Google this. I did. The Hill reporting that it's going to be a Bible given him by his mother and a Lincoln Bible for swearing it.
There we know. Asked and answered. All right, this is Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Developing story with the Federal Trade Commission reviewing big tech AI relationships. Now, according to the FTC, the Microsoft OpenAI partnership raises antitrust concerns after an initial move lower. Microsoft shares are trading higher, up now by about 1.2%. S&P 500 index on track for its best week since the November election. Stocks ripping higher on this Friday. On the week, we have the S&P up by roughly 3% right now today, up 1.2%, 6,006 where we stand on the index, up 69. The Dow up 385, up 0.9%. NASDAQ up 332 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain of 1.7%. 10-year 4.61%, the 2-year 4.26%. Gold down $7 the ounce, down 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude 78.30 a barrel, down 0.5%. A surge in Bitcoin today, trading now above 105,000. Bitcoin jumping in the past few minutes, now up by 5.5%. Bitcoin 105,639 on Bitcoin. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 69, gain there of 1.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic live here on Bloomberg Business Week. Well, LA Mayor Karen Bass issued an executive order that happened on Monday to ease rebuilding nearly 3,000 houses destroyed in the Pacific Palisades. The order suspends an ordinance that would have required replacement homes to be all electric, which would have greatly reduced the use of natural gas in a high-risk fire zone. We wanted to get into what is already starting to be thought about when it comes to the rebuild in LA and also the latest on the fires. We head out to D.C. Bloomberg Green U.S. team leader Amanda Colson-Hurley, part of our vast team that has been tracking the LA wildfires. Amanda, let's start with what we know on the LA wildfires, where we are.
Sure, Carol. The fires, are still an ongoing disaster. It's going to be a long time before, they have yet to fully contain them. The winds have eased for a while, which is good. That helps efforts at containment. But this is not something that we're really out of yet. But the damage they've done is just catastrophic, and so it's not really surprising that already, even before this event is finished, thoughts have turned to what comes next and to the urgency of taking steps to rebuild.
Well, thousands of structures have been lost, Amanda. What do we know about the rebuilding effort? We know it's going to take a long time. We know cleanup has yet to begin in some of these areas. As you mentioned, fires not even out at this point. What does the rebuild look like?
Yeah, well, past disasters have shown that, rebuilds can be pretty slow, and, sometimes neighborhoods don't kind of return to their full population for a long time, if ever. I believe in Paradise, California, which was affected by, a terrible fire several years ago. It just still, people have moved back and new people have moved in, but it's just not anywhere near the population level it once had. So I think that leaders in LA and California are very cognizant of that. And, they are looking at speed. They are looking at cutting red tape and making it possible for displaced families who have lost, everything to try to go back and rebuild their lives. And so, as you said, Carol, at the top of the segment, they're waiving some of the green building requirements, and this is in a state that really prides itself on being a climate leader, but they're saying, you don't have to do that. You don't have to check all of these boxes to build back. We just want to help you get started, and they want to expedite permits.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's a great read, and I know for some might say, well, it's crazy that we're thinking already about rebuilding, but you can only imagine to try and get people back in their homes and get back to quote unquote normal in that region. But so appreciate the update. I highly recommend everybody check out the deep dive on the rebuild and what's being done. You can head to Bloomberg.com or check it out on the Bloomberg terminal. Amanda, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Amanda Coulson-Hurley, U.S. team leader at Bloomberg Green. They and across the board have been so busy tracking these fires. Tim.
Well, the fire is still a big story here in the U.S. and indeed around the world. Now to another story that's been top of mind globally, and that is the war between Israel and Hamas. Israel's high-level security cabinet approved a ceasefire and hostage prisoner exchange deal with Hamas, paving the way for a weeks-long pause starting Sunday to the 15 months of fighting in Gaza.
The deal is now being discussed by the full cabinet, where it's expected to be signed off despite opposition by some far-right members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. With more on the ceasefire deal, what comes next, and what comes in the years that we look ahead at, we head to Jerusalem and to Bloomberg News Jerusalem journalist Dan Williams. Dan, good to have you here with us. This high-level security cabinet in Israel approval seems like a very big step toward the ceasefire being put into effect. Explain the move, the significance, and then what kind of comes next in the coming days.
Well, that's a reduced forum of senior Israeli ministers. Generally, they're consulted on day-to-day issues of war and peace, but for something this magnitude, ratification, approval in the full cabinet is required, and that full cabinet is still meeting now, and that's unusual. As you can see behind me, it's dark. We're well into the Jewish Sabbath. Ordinarily, the Israeli civil service would be completely shut down. It's worth remembering a number of ministers in this government are religiously observant Jews. The fact they are meeting, the fact they are working over the Sabbath shows the urgency of the matter. It's literally a matter of life and death. And I think the push is, despite a degree of resistance from far-right members of the coalition, as you noted, the push is to get this deal confirmed, approved by that government body so it can get underway on Sunday.
Hey, Dan, one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you, when we've got a great team throughout Israel, we wanted to get an understanding of the mood on the ground in recent days as the details of this ceasefire have emerged. What can you tell us about what's happening on the ground in Jerusalem, what you're hearing from folks who are and have been affected by this?
I think I'd characterize it as a general sense of measured relief, but an onset of anticipated grief. Why is that? Because we're going to see a third of the hostages remaining in Gaza from that October 7th, 2023 attack by Hamas that began this war. A third of them are going to be coming out in the coming 6 weeks. The problem is no one knows for sure if all are alive. In fact, some are assumed to have died. Hamas has not been open or forthcoming about the conditions of all of the hostages. It's spoken about only a few, and at times it's actually given false information. At least one hostage said to have died, and then she proved to have actually survived, and she was extracted during a first truce in 2023. So what you have now is anticipation of hostages coming back. They've been held incommunicado for 15 months. No one knows for sure what their condition is, but they're assumed to be in very poor condition. In fact, the government, Israel's version of Social Security, has already announced that they will automatically be deemed to be 50% handicapped. That's for the sake of future government benefits as handicapped persons. That's before they've even been examined by doctors or psychologists. So those surviving hostages presumably will come back, and there will be much relief and much joy. It will be mixed by concern for their safety, for their condition. They won't be immediately reconciled or reunited, with their families while they're being inspected. And again, sadly, some of those hostages will come back in coffins, and no one knows for sure who they are. So yes, there is some relief. I think Israelis, like Palestinians in Gaza, which has been devastated, will be happy to see a reprieve from this fighting. The number of Israelis killed in this war on a per capita level is almost 4 times the number of US soldiers killed in Afghanistan and Iraq in all of the years of those conflicts. And we're talking about a conscript military in Israel. So the impact is felt pretty much in every home. This is a very serious conflict. It's still open-ended. No one's talking about peace with Hamas. There cannot be peace with Hamas. So at best, this will be an open-ended ceasefire. Time will tell if this first phase that we're now talking about 6 weeks will indeed unfurl into a longer, open-ended ceasefire that involves the return of all remaining hostages and the release of many hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and reconstruction of the Gaza Strip.
Dan, I'm wondering if there's any view on why this is all happening right ahead of Donald Trump coming into office. Is it that Hamas was concerned about a second Trump White House and what it would mean for them? Understanding clearly the Trump allegiance that has been shown in the past to both Israel and to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Is that the concern? I'm just curious if there's any thought around that.
That's the prevalent theory here. Hamas has not openly confirmed that. However, I think there's no doubting that the re-election of Donald Trump, the sweeping and surprise and shock and impressive re-election of Donald Trump, has energized U.S. influence in the region. A lot of people are wondering what holds for the Middle East under a second Trump administration. And when this incoming president said, and I quote, "There'll be all hell to pay if the hostages don't come back by the time of his inauguration," that tends to focus minds across the region. So there's some indication that Hamas is taking him seriously, perhaps more so the mediating countries, Qatar and Egypt. Keep in mind, Hamas doesn't talk to Israel. Israel doesn't talk to Hamas. Hamas is blacklisted by the United States and widely in the West as a terrorist group. Now, Qatar and Egypt are countries that really do care about maintaining good relationships with the United States, and they may be concerned that if they can't apply pressure on Hamas to deliver a deal, they may face the wrath of this administration. We've had a number of incoming figures of the administration talking about really a very, should we say, unforgiving approach to Hamas. Israel, I think, at least on a rhetorical level, believes that should it go to war again with Hamas, it will have unstinting support from this administration. The Biden administration was very supportive, but there were differences on tactics, there were differences on scheduling, there were differences over the number of Palestinian civilians killed and suffering in Gaza. And I don't think we would see those differences, at least not openly, with the Trump administration. So Hamas will be wondering if maybe this is the time to cut a deal, to win a reprieve, perhaps to work a short-term truce, parlay it into something longer term that will allow Hamas to survive, if not thrive, and its surviving members to really be part of the future Gaza Strip, though it's really unclear what a day after government there would look like, given that Israel has sworn to make sure that Hamas will not remain in power.
Well, that's exactly where I want to end things, just in the last minute that we have with you, Dan, is get an understanding from you about what that day one in Gaza looks like now that a lot of Hamas's infrastructure has been destroyed. We know that Hamas has successfully recruited other people to join the organization, but what is Gaza post this war?
Gaza is devastated in a way no one has seen before. Keep in mind, it wasn't a happy place before this war. There was widespread privation, there was widespread unemployment, there were ruins and rubble from previous wars that were still unattended, that still had to be rebuilt. But really now there's devastation there that, frankly, no one could have imagined previously. This was a game-changer war. I think the Israeli approach was that Hamas, in carrying out that attack on October 7th, in which 1,200 people were killed, some 250 taken captive, it really did change the rules. And basically, Israel came in and said, well, in that case, that was a game changer. We're going to change the rules ourselves. And the Israeli approach has been not just to try to recover those hostages through military pressure, the occasional operation. It's been to literally uproot Hamas. And uprooting Hamas means attending to the underground system there. That has caused lots and lots of damage in the Gaza Strip. The very question of rebuilding is going to be a huge question hanging over this.
Absolutely.
Time will tell. I don't think anyone has answers.
Dan Williams, thank you so much. Bloomberg News Jerusalem journalist joining us from Jerusalem. When we come back, the CFO of insurance giant Aon.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all ripping higher on the week now. The S&P 500 index up by roughly 3%. Right now we're holding close to session highs. S&P back above 6,000, up 69 points now, up 1.2%. S&P 500 index at 6,006. The Dow up 392, up 9.